Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Graham Brookie. I'm the Vice President of all of the technology programs here at the Atlantic Council. And that was some very assertive music for a strategy, for a US strategy in AI. So thank you so much for joining us here in person today in Washington, DC. And thank you to those of you tuning in all around the world. Today's conversation is how the US and allies can win in the AI era. This year marks the 250th anniversary of the United States, and throughout its history, the US has stood firm at the cutting edge of successive technology revolutions that have shaped the world that we live in today. And this is not by chance, but by design. We bring together builders and innovators from around the globe. We embrace discovery, creativity, openness, and a willingness to come together, adapt, innovate, and achieve something greater than the sum of our parts. It's core to who we are as a country. Artificial intelligence is the defining technology of this era. Its implications for our economic competitiveness, for national security, democratic governance, and the human condition itself are profound in reshaping the world around us. But then again, you all joined us here today, so you all know all of that already. We're currently experiencing the fastest rate of technological change in human history. And that's why at the Atlantic Council, we formed the Atlantic Council Commission on Artificial Intelligence to meet the moment and to build a connective and comprehensive approach for continued US leadership while matching the speed of that technological change. The Commission invited leaders from industry, from civil society, and government. And over the last 8 months, we deliberated and debated and worked together, and I would hope they will say today that they had a lot of fun. During our work together over that 8 months, a lot changed. So just to give you a sense, leading AI labs released about 18 frontier models. That equates to one roughly every other week. An American AI company became the first valued at $5 trillion, having grown 500% within the last 3 years. The use of AI was confirmed in at least 2 military operations in both Venezuela and Iran. The adoption of AI agents performing complex and highly automated tasks expanded rapidly. The Pope released a rare encyclical on AI, which I think we'll hear about a little bit today, that centered humanity in this era of AI. And recent frontier model developments like Mythos are fundamentally changing the global security landscape. All of this underscores the significance and the urgency of the work of this commission. And it informs our recommendations in 2 ways. First, we need a new model of public and private partnership matched with a strong commitment to work together in the national and global interest. And such a model is within reach, so that's the good news. Second, the window to realize that change is rapidly narrowing, and we have to act now. So the effort of the Atlantic Council Commission on AI was the first of its scale and ambition since the release of Mythos. And in the final report, which we released a few hours ago, or published a few hours ago, the Commission outlines the building blocks for a comprehensive strategy for AI leadership, matched with the foundation for measuring our collective success. And today, we invite you to explore our key findings and recommendations, together with our commissioners who are here in the audience and we'll be hearing from throughout this afternoon. So I hope that you hear all those perspectives and join this conversation. I'm especially thankful to our entire commission, including our co-chairs, Ron Ash and Kemba Walden, for leading this significant body of work. I'm thankful to our honorary congressional co-chairs, Senators Todd Young and John Hickenlooper, and Representatives Suzanne DelBene and Jay Obernolte for their partnership in the commission. We'll be hearing from the senators at 6:30 p.m. this evening. I promised Senator Hickenlooper that we would have Colorado beverages on hand. And I would also like to extend my appreciation to the teams across the Atlantic Council, all of the 16 centers and programs across the Atlantic Council for which they contributed expertise, including the Cyber Statecraft Initiative, the Global Energy Center, and many more. In particular, I'd like to thank the GeoTech Center team, and that includes Tess DeBlanc-Knowles, Dr. Raul Brenz Jr., Coley Felt, Tricia Ray, Emily Sespico, Ryan Pan, and Emma Hopp. They have worked tirelessly on this entire body of work, this massive trove of ideas, and possibilities and made them into more digestible and actionable ideas that I hope that you will read on the internet. So thank you to the team. They're here in this room right now. And I hope that you all find this useful and will use some of these recommendations in your own work. I'll say this for us, this is just the beginning of our work on this set of issues, and I hope that you'll also join us in the effort going forward to do our mission at the Atlantic Council, shape the global future, together, in this case, on artificial intelligence. I'll now hand it over to my boss, Fred Kemp, Atlantic Council President and CEO. And for our purposes today, Fred, as a commissioner on our Atlantic Council Commission on AI, for our first fireside chat featuring our co-chairs. Thank you so much.
So Graham, AI wasn't enough. We had to offer the senator a Colorado beverage or two as well. Thanks for that introduction, and congratulations to the commissioners and to the team. I read a lot on artificial intelligence, like many of you in the audience. I'm obsessed with the subject. And it's really a pleasure when your own organization puts out something where you believe something new has been said and something directional has been said. We all know that we're probably at the 1% point in artificial intelligence in terms of what's coming at us. And this is a roadmap that will help us, I hope, navigate the other 99% as well. So I also want to thank our co-chairs, Ron and Kemba. Thank you so much for all your impressive leadership shaping the Commission's work over these past 8 months to develop a set of pragmatic and essential recommendations. The title of our session this afternoon is The AI Era, What the U.S. Must Get Right. I put it a little differently. I just published something in my own column, Inflection Points. By the way, you've got the report to read. You've got the Pope's encyclical to read. You could put mine third on that list, and don't worry, I'm not going to be hurt by it. But my own headline was, the U.S. is struggling with its adversaries over the future of AI. Here's how to win. And so that's my own title for that report. We've been, as Graham said, we've been historically at the epicenter of technological innovation in the world. You didn't mention this, but I'd start with the Manhattan Project, dawn of the internet, 1960s, .com era, 1990s, social media boom, early 2000s, 2010s. We've led generations of technology advancements that transformed the world and the lives of billions. I don't have to tell you how the world would be different if we had come second to the Manhattan Project, to the Third Reich. We're not, the stakes are quite different than they are now, but the stakes of falling behind are large, but the shapes in terms of shaping what's coming at us are equally large. As I said in my own paper, the most important debate about artificial intelligence is no longer whether or how fast the technology will advance. It's instead whether the U.S. and enlightened partners can provide the moral purpose, political leadership, and strategic vision to guide that inevitable advance. There are different visions for using artificial intelligence. This is a moving target, and so this is the beginning of the discussion. Let me get to our first question. This is a big report. It says a lot of things. 8 overall findings, dozens of recommendations across 6 areas, key areas of focus. And these areas are intentional: innovation, energy infrastructure, resilient supply chains, talent institutions, government adoption and oversight, allied and partner engagement. And there are recommendations and reflections in each of these areas, and they're all worth reading. But you're the commissioners, you're the 2 co-chairs. I'll start with you, Kemba, and then to Ron. As you did this report, as you're reading it now, what climbs out to you as the most urgent and important for people in the audience today and for the country?
Well, first, thank you for inviting us here to help launch this report. It was a lot of work over the last 8 months, a lot of good work, and so we're really quite proud of it. And the commissioners made our jobs easier and kind of fun, Graham. So this is great. I would say the most important piece of this is actually at the end, the scorecard. In my view, having public trust as one of those pieces that we measure as in terms of success, I think is important. One of the statistics that came out to me during the commission meetings was that 38% of the U.S. is enthusiastic about AI. That's the good news. The bad news is that 60% of the U.S. is not thrilled with AI, or they don't trust it. And so trust has to be a strategic imperative here. And we need to make sure that AI is demonstrably trustworthy in order to be able to build that kind of trust in the system. And having that scorecard at the end, I think, is important. So I think U.S. leadership means that we do all of the things all at once and not in sequence, and that's sort of the tone and tenor of the report. I know you asked for one, but that's
that's
what
really,
I've got.
That's really helpful, because we'll come back to the scorecard. We'll also come back to the question of public trust. So I'm glad you teed up those 2 points. Ron.
So I think you covered it a little bit earlier, which is the idea that this is at the same level as the Manhattan Project or space race. This is a can't lose moment, right? So for me, I think it's bringing together the fact that this is a winner-take-all situation, and we need to approach it differently, much like we did with Manhattan Project, and bring a whole-of-nation approach to the way that we're attacking this problem, because it's not just technology, it's the whole ecosystem that ties to AI, and that's much different than previous technological waves that we've had, where it's just the internet, right? And you didn't have all the stack, energy, supply chain, et cetera, that were tied to it. So to me, it's elevating AI to this real race that we're in with our adversaries to make sure that we win, because our way of life, the future of commerce, defense, democracy itself is in the balance if we don't win. So that's what's my focus.
Let me follow up first with you, Ron, because this Manhattan Project AI race, very different races. One is over a single nuclear weapon and nuclear capability to produce it. This is much more complex, right. And many more players. There's just not two countries in the race at that time. But you did say it's winner take all. The stakes are enormous. Can you compare the stakes of the two? Also, maybe to the space race you were talking about as well?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of noise in this system right now about AI and the risks of AI, but I believe that fear is misguided, right? That this is the news and the cycles are negative, whereas AI can change the way we work and live in profound ways. And ultimately what we need to do is, much like the space race, is organize and get the message to the people that there are great things that are going to happen from AI, and they already are happening. Right, Graham, you talked about some of the advances we've had in the 2 wars that we've just had, where AI was a big player in how we planned and executed those wars. That's just going to continue to exponentially grow. But the news cycle is a little more focused on data centers and the use of water and land and things that, like, ultimately is just noise, because it's going to take our attention away from the fact that AI can be a positive and will be a positive. It's just with the space race, we had one enemy, and this is a very different situation, right? Where it's really, how are we going to change as a humanity to be able to partner with technology going forward? And that's the real challenge we have in front of us.
And I am interpreting the move of microphone toward mouth that you want to jump in here. This is my own AI at work.
Yeah, you guys are going to see the commission at work in real time, because this is how Ron and I operate. But I would agree. But the conversation around data centers and water and power and all of that is all important. But I think that's more of a symptom of the stats that we articulate in Chapter 2, right? The 38% is enthusiastic, 60% is distrustful of AI. And so it's more than messaging about trusting AI. It's making it demonstrably trustworthy, which means we have a whole governance chapter on governance. We have a whole chapter or elements of chapters on safety and security. But it means, what is AI going to deliver to everybody on a daily basis? It means, how are we going to help enterprises employ people or train and retrain people? We have a whole chapter on that, and I think a whole panel on that. So the commission, in my view, really tried to tackle how to make sure that AI and the ecosystem for AI is demonstrably trustworthy, meaning that we measure things, and rather than just saying people it's going to change your lives. The commission really worked hard at making sure that we have 64 recommendations in there for members of Congress and industry to take up. But the point is making it trustworthy, because if it's not trustworthy to the people, to the end users, it's not going to be adopted at the rate that we are all aiming for, right?
So let's drill down on that, because I actually think the report's emphasis on trustworthiness and on the problem of distrust right now, misgivings the American public have, it was one of the most interesting parts of the report. I'm from Utah, not really usually the hotbed of international dissent, but yet in the northwest corner of my state, Mr. Wonderful Kevin O'Leary is driving a big data center project that's facing a lot of protest in Salt Lake City and throughout the state. When I look at AI as not as deep of an expert as the two of you are and most of the commissioners, I see a technology that super empowers good. You can solve cancer. It can super empower evil. You could build a biological weapon, even if you're not a great power over time. So there is some reason for distrust and nervousness. But talk about it a little bit. And Kevin, maybe start with you. As you look at the sources of that distrust and the significance of it to the race we're all talking about, how do you look at it? Where is it coming from, and how does one address it?
I think two things. One, people misunderstand what AI is. I don't know that we're doing a good job of explaining what it is. And two, as a practical matter, people are concerned that it's going to disrupt their livelihood. They're not going to have jobs any longer, that they have to learn an entirely new ecosystem in order to be employable. If you look at kids coming out of college, kids are app natives. They have worked through the internet. They're masters of application, that application layer. So technology is not a new space for them, but they're coming out of school terrified that they will not be able to find a job. And that's a significant portion of the population. And I think we as policymakers and industry leaders haven't done a good job of making sure that we explain what AI is and demonstrate how it's going to be beneficial for everybody's daily life and their humanity, right? I think that's what we're missing. Not the commissioners, but I think that's what the conversation needs to be.
Ron?
Yeah, completely agree. And I think, look, this really isn't a tech race. This is a race for our national readiness and for our people to be aligned with this mission. And what I see that's happening, and we have the privilege of having a lot of AI projects that have gone good and gone bad. And there's one statistic that is tied to every AI program that we've had that it's gone really well and they've had impact. And it's for every $1 that organizations are investing in AI technology, they're investing $9 in people, in training them and getting them ready to be able to use the AI in process. They're rewiring how their whole organizations work. And data, they spend the time up front to get the data ready and have governance models in place for the AI to be used. When organizations take that strategy and don't just throw money at tech, that's when you build the trust, and that's when you see real applicability. And that's happening in pockets in our government. It's happening much more on the commercial side. But that's where we need to get to, because people are going to ultimately drive this, who wins this race, who's going to accept this technology and not just reject it because they're fearful they're going to lose their jobs.
Thank you for that.
And
Please.
data centers are
Yeah.
really a tangible visual for people to protest, right? And not to say that there aren't valid noise concerns and all of that, but that's the tangible thing that people can touch and protest. But I really think that there's a lot more going on underneath the surface.
Yeah, in my own piece, I was suggesting that one has to give the examples. How has AI improved government services? What medical breakthrough is AI putting through? You see Nobel Prize scientists, some of the finest scientists in the world, not fighting AI, but saying, well, maybe this is going to help me get to a solution for Alzheimer's faster than I might have done otherwise. So I hope that happens. And I think we have to remember as well, the second industrial revolution brought a lot of well-being to a lot of people. But it also brought political change, communism, capitalism, World War II, mechanized warfare, World War I. So there's a lot coming at us, and we're just starting to think about it. So Ron, let me come to you next. The Commission recommended that innovation and adoption be treated as equal national priorities when it comes to AI. Can you tell me what you mean or what that means when you say that? What do you see as needed to accelerate not just AI innovation, but integration?
Yeah, so this goes back to, I think Kempa mentioned and I mentioned earlier, that AI is different. There's an ecosystem that's tied to the adoption of AI, and we have to bring it all together. And what I mean by that is it's the chips, it's the cybersecurity, it's the data centers, it's the people and talent to be able to apply that technology. To me, that is taking a step back and making sure that we're looking at this through that lens and not just trying to individually optimize each of those areas, because we'll ultimately hit a brick wall, right? If we apply AI and we don't have the data centers, we're going to not be able to, we're not going to be able to use the AI at the scale we want to. So to me, that's the single most important thing, is getting that whole of AI approach. And when I think about us doing that as a nation and then looking and bringing our allies in, it's a force multiplier for the pace at which we can apply our AI with our allies across against our adversaries, which is going to be really important. You think about Mythos and what happened with that, that's going to happen again, and it's going to come the other way, where it's not going to be us defining it, and our allies, and having that supply chain is going to be critically important to fighting against a scenario like that.
What's your view on the same thing? That how do you ensure innovation doesn't outpace our ability to implement it responsibly? And you've been in a big government job. Perhaps you can share with the audience what you did in that job and what you'd be deciding now if you were in that job, because it's a totally different atmosphere now than when you were there regarding artificial intelligence.
Sure. So I'll start with the last question first. So I was, for those of you that don't know, I was a part of a startup in the White House. We started the Office of the National Cyber Director. I was its principal deputy and its acting National Cyber Director at a time when we published a national cybersecurity strategy. So thankfully, I don't have Sean Carencross's job right now, as he is the National Cyber Director at this time of AI.
Mythos would be on his plate.
And Mythos and all that is on his plate. Yeah. A couple of things, and it's articulated well in the report. You can't manage what you don't measure, right? You have to understand the baseline. So one of the things that I would be doing right now, if I were in public office, would be trying to figure out what those metrics are, measuring them, calling for incident reporting, for example. Once we have Mythos out there running in the wild, I would be calling for better, improved vulnerability disclosure, some very practical things. I would be organizing a whole of government, federal government, action plan for not only delivering the AI action plan and implementing it, but also making sure that it's safe and secure and trustworthy. So those are all, I can say those things simply from the comfort of this chair on this stage. Those aren't easy things to do or to manage. But I think measurement is the first step that I would take.
You spoke earlier about the scorecard as one of the, you thought most important things suggested here. Can you tell us a little bit more what the scorecard would measure and why you think the scorecard is such an important element of this report?
Yeah, so the scorecard, I think, has 7 different matrices across the 6 pillars plus public trust, and it's meant to identify a benchmark across all 6 pillars. The thing I cannot stand, and it's reflected in the commission report, is a report that is well-written, has all the right words, but then sits on a shelf. You need to implement it. You need to have others participate in that process. That is an opportunity to implement and to invite others into the process. And I would expect in 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, we will be measuring our progress against that dynamic scorecard, right? So AI is not a moment in time, and its adoption, its implementation, whether we win whatever this race is, it's not a moment in time, but we have to benchmark it. And I think it's important if you're going to manage it, if you're going to cause the ecosystem to be trustworthy enough for people to trust it.
So would you suggest that until others get there, that the Atlantic Council might want to implement a scorecard of our own? Ron?
Yes, I would, for sure.
I think we may go in that direction. And thanks for letting us into what would be going on in government quarters right now. Maybe Ron, you can take a look at this too, because there's this race wanting to innovate as quickly as possible, not falling behind, and then there's taking care of all the safety considerations. You know, there's a public part to this, there's a private part to this. The administration has been very much on the side of not wanting to slow the innovation, yet an executive order has not yet come out of the administration. I don't have any special insight into why that's not the case, but I would imagine that there is this tug of war between those who really want to unleash private enterprise to get to wherever they can get as fast as they can, and those who feel that the government has a special responsibility that this doesn't go off the rails. So why don't you answer how you think about this, and then Kemba to follow up.
This is a challenge we face all the time with our clients, trying to help them manage pace and safety. And what we advise is that they choose being iterative. And what I mean by that is setting broad goals to be able to reduce the price of energy by 50% in the next 3 years, and then starting in iterations to be able to do that, and then scaling it quickly, right? So a great example that we have right now is we're working with the Department of Energy to build something that will in the future will identify the best places to put data centers. But we're working in very segmented iterations. The first iteration is just building models that are trained on where where our US grid is now and where there's excess capacity. So then you have the ability to very quickly go in and say, I want to build a 1 kilowatt data center, and they can show you where you can build that. The next iteration we're working on is availability of resources, both human and materials. Then we're going to be looking at permitting, right? And you'll be able to slice those iterations one by one, so we can still move fast, and those are happening in weeks, right? But you're also measuring and making sure that you're not moving too fast and the technology's not working, right? So to me, it's having that bigger vision and moving in iterations. That's how we stay ahead and continue to be safe.
Kemba.
So I think, leaving energy aside, I think what we have to do is be deliberate about how we engage with our allies across borders. I think we have to remember that AI is an ecosystem, that supply chain is very much a part of this, and that we don't necessarily win without going shoulder to shoulder with our allies, not only in Northern Europe, but in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in South and Latin America. I think we need to really create an alliance that is democracy-facing, so that we can make sure that the AI ecosystem has the characteristics that carry with it all of our intentions, right? I think that's part of the process for winning, and we have a whole chapter in there on winning this race with our allies.
I wonder if you could drill down on that chapter a little bit, which I thought was a really important chapter, particularly for the Atlantic Council. And our mission is shaping the global future together with partners and allies. That's been our vision for 65 years. That could be contradictory to the vision of trying to get everybody to use the American stack and the AI stack and AI dominance, or at least some countries might read it that way. So U.S. stack, allied stack, what's the importance of the alliance in this? Particularly, we're ahead of our allies. We know that for sure. I think ahead in many respects regarding China. I'm not sure in all respects, but talk a little bit more about that chapter and this potential contradiction between U.S. AI dominance, U.S. stack, allied stack.
So I just think of it as a trusted AI stack with technologies throughout the stack that inherits the characteristics we need it to inherit as a democratic allied. There were 73 democracies across the world, I believe, or something in that around then. I think that is a dominant space for us. It has to be an allied stack. I know it sounds counterintuitive to a U.S. AI stack, but if you look at the 5G wars that we had or the 5G complications that we had over time, we were trying to figure out how to deliver a full 5G stack that wasn't necessarily interoperable. The challenge there was that China also offered a 5G stack that wasn't interoperable. What if we had a stack in the 5G world that had interoperability with some of our allied partners so that countries could pick and choose or deliver how they wanted their telecommunications stack to be delivered, how they want to deliver telecommunications. The same is true now, fast forward, with the AI stack. We need to give countries an opportunity to have interoperability for technologies that will deliver AI in their nation for their purposes. That isn't necessarily the cheaper open source models that many Chinese companies offer.
And how does this look from the standpoint of private business, the private sector? And for those that aren't as geeky as all of us are up here, could you translate stack into English and what it means?
Well, look, I think Kemp is spot on. We're going to be better when we're working with our allies and not just trying to isolate whether it's the models, the chips, and the data. We're going to benefit from having shared models and IP across our allies. And I think DOW does this best, where we share information and data with our allies. We need to do that with all of AI and not necessarily just say we're going to only build sovereign AI within our country, because there's going to be better technologies in places that are not in the U.S., and we need to be able to take advantage of it from our allies.
And stack, can one of you translate
So
that?
it's stack. Stack is, from my point of view, AI is the data that fuels it. The model, the algorithm, the funny math, the infrastructure, the energy, the power, the water, the application, the user interface piece of it, and the governance, the wrapper around it. That's how I would view the AI tech stack, and that's from a policy perspective. Go talk to a technologist. There are probably 5 or 6 other pieces to that, but that's generally what it is: data, model, infrastructure, application, governance.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think now I finally understand it. So let me go to a final question to both of you. And this one's a little bit big and broad. I want to look out a few years. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years. But you want to see this report get used. You said it shouldn't just sit on shelves, it should be used. For you, looking out, and this gets to the question of U.S. leadership as well. Mythos has got people worried about cybersecurity, about the global security landscape. There's going to be other mythoses, one relatively soon, I think, in the bio space, I've heard. What's this pick your time, 5, 10 years out, what's best case outcome, worst case outcome, some middle case, and why don't you go first, Kemba, and then Ron can close.
Okay, if we're talking a mythos-like capability that multiplies, we will have a secure code base in our digital infrastructure within 5 years. That is something I think now is achievable, now that we have a tool in AI. If you think of AI increasing risk, if you think of risk as threat, vulnerability, and consequence, AI really is just another tool to increase capability for threat actor. Assume high intent, now we have high capability, you have high risk. If we can eliminate as many vulnerabilities as possible, we can reduce that risk, and using AI to do that from a cybersecurity perspective. Risk is measured in similar ways in the biospace as well. But I would imagine that we would have a better source code or code base in our digital infrastructure in 5 years.
Thank you, Kimba. Ron.
All right, I'll take a slightly different angle. That was great. When I look back, or when we look back in a couple years, I think we need to have 5 or so Genesis mission type ambitions, right? So if you haven't heard about the Genesis mission, please look it up. But that is, in my view, the best approach that this administration has taken to advance AI for science, so we lead and win in a very particular, important area around science and scientific discovery. And just last week, I hosted Undersecretary Gill, who's leading the Genesis mission, and 80 leaders from across the labs and DOW to talk about how do we make sure that we're taking the best data that we have in the world in our scientific labs, and we're bringing the best of technology to those things, so our scientists are always using the best technology to be able to drive demonstrable change in the way we're looking at critical minerals, materials, et cetera. We need more of those. This is that concept of that whole of nation approach, where we're taking the right data and the right tools to be able to do it. I don't know what the next one needs to be, but there's probably at least 5 more that we need across the different industry segments. So we have that whole of nation approach. We have goals. They have 20 grand plans where they're going to really change the way science is working in the United States. That's what we need. 5 of those.
Great, and then I think it couldn't be more important to reinforce that we're at the beginning of an era, in the first minutes of an era, and so laying out the set of rules, the set of operating procedures, I hope over time, international conversations is going to be crucial. So thank you to Ron and Kemba for your insights and for leading this commission over the last 8 months. I had a mentor of mine who I really respected a great deal, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who passed away not so long ago. And she used to always like to describe herself as an optimist who worries a lot. And so I'm an optimist who worries a lot. And if you're an optimist who worries a lot, this is the report for you. This is the day for you. This is a panel for you, because there's a lot to worry about, but there's a lot to be optimistic about at the same time. And it's not the first time we've navigated these sorts of choices, but the stakes are pretty high with this technology. So thank you for being here. Thanks to the commissioners, and hold on for the next panel.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you to everyone who's joined us here at the Atlanta Council and those who are joining us online. My name is Tess DeBlanc-Knowles. I serve as Senior Director of the Atlanta Council's Technology Programs, and I've had the pleasure and the privilege to be involved in this effort since we kicked it off last fall. I am very excited to have the opportunity to bring together the folks that we have on stage today for a discussion on AI innovation and talent. And each of them brings a wealth of expertise and experience in these issues, really from all corners of the AI ecosystem. So I'm going to provide some very brief introductions of our panelists, and then we'll move into discussion. And as a heads up, we will reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes of the conversation for questions from the audience. So folks in the room, start to think about your questions. And for those who are joining remotely, you can please submit those questions in writing at askac.org, and we'll be able to pull them up here in the room. So with us today, I am very pleased to welcome Erwin Johnson-Donnie, who leads the Directorate for Technology Innovation and Partnerships, or TIP, at the National Science Foundation, which focuses on advancing use-inspired and translational research in those critical and emerging technologies that are central to continued US competitiveness, AI central among them. We also have Nabiha Said, who serves as Executive Director of the Mozilla Foundation, a global nonprofit focused on championing trustworthy AI and advocating for a more open and equitable internet. Nabiha also served as a commissioner on this effort, so thank you again, Nabiha, for your expertise and your time devoted to this work. We also have Don Vieira, who also served as a commissioner. Thank you, Don. Don leads the tech policy practice at Skadden, where he also serves as a partner, and previously served as partner, chief legal officer, and chief policy officer at Sequoia Capital. And then finally, Jenna Lee Keefe-Singer, Senior Director of Government Affairs for the Special Competitive Studies Project, which is a bipartisan nonprofit focused on strengthening US competitiveness in AI and other emerging technologies. Before joining SESP, Jenna Lee had 16 years of federal experience, including as Senior AI Policy Advisor at NIST and staff positions on the Hill. So we're going to jump in with a kind of big picture framing question that I'd love to get all of your perspectives on. The Commission's report treats innovation and talent as really fundamental and foundational pillars to a US leadership in AI. So from your perspectives, where are we as a country getting things right in innovation and talent, and what are we getting wrong? Anyone who wants to jump in first?
So I picked up the mic, so that's me. So innovation is what you get when you give talent resources, freedom, and vision, right? So we are extraordinarily lucky in this country to have amazing talent that some folks we have imported in and cultivated, some we have trained in our universities. We're doing a great job there. We have resources. But where I think we're really failing is the affirmative vision of what good looks like. And that goes to what Commissioner Walden was saying in terms of the trustworthiness gap. There are a lot of people in this country who say, well, how does this benefit me? I understand how this is going to benefit some people. Don't doubt that. But what about me? And that affirmative vision is a necessary component of getting the buy-in, because otherwise the message is, catch up. You're too late. You're too late to your own funeral, where your own industry and your own work is going to be decimated. And that's not a compelling message to anybody. So I think the vision component is where we could really stand to do a better job.
If I could double down on that, I 100% agree. I think people in this nation are really interested in understanding how they are part of an AI future. And I know at SCSP, we started a task force with NVIDIA on AI and the future of work, because one of the biggest pieces of heartburn for Americans is, will I have a job as AI progresses? And so I'm really happy to see the recommendations that you've outlined in the report and how that can help bring that to fruition for people.
I will add my voice to the concern about the way the AI is being articulated. My concern is it's being positioned as a competition with the American people between technology and the worker, and that concerns me, because I think ultimately it's an enabler to unlock so many things we can't do now. And I think there has to be somebody has to get that vision out there. I mean, you've seen recently at university graduation ceremonies, students understandably expressing concern about their future, and we need to do a better job of explaining what this does for them. And so many of the applications in AI are just transformative. And we're really, to Fred's point earlier, in the earliest stages of a transformational moment that I think with the right framework and foundation will be incredibly beneficial to humanity. So that's what we're not getting right. What we're getting right, I think, is we have so many things in this country that have enabled the development of this technology. Our university system is unparalleled, really, in the world. Our venture capital system for financing private sector innovation is the envy of the world. As somebody who was in that sector before, I can say that. And our ability to attract talent from the rest of the world here continues to amaze me and is something we really need to foster. So we get some things right too.
Yeah, so I would agree with everything that my colleagues have said, and I will try not to repeat them. So +1 to the comments about what are we getting right. I'm going to focus on 2 things where I think we could offer some improvements to the ecosystem. So the first is to this point about the American public writ large. You know, I think we all hear in the news media these stories about artificial intelligence and what it's going to do for our jobs and what it's going to do for talent and so forth. Yet I would argue, and I say this with all due respect to the entire nation, the vast majority of talent in this country is still trying to understand what AI actually is, right? And trying to be able to recognize that there's an opportunity for us to help meet that talent where that talent is. So there are some folks who probably have that fluency in AI and they can use a large language model to great effect, right? And then there are those who are proficient to the point that they can actually develop the next generation of AI systems. But there are still those who we have to provide, I think, that basic literacy to in terms of understanding that just because I'm walking around with a smart device, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is AI in and of itself. So I think that's one fundamental challenge that we face. And we're working at it at NSF and across the ecosystem, and we can talk about that. The other thing that I would say is from a researcher's perspective, in terms of being able to help support AI for science, in terms of being able to help support the next generation of breakthroughs in intelligence, giving rise to AI systems of the future. I think it's imperative for us to recognize that there are some things that we could tweak about the higher education enterprise in this country. The fact that both the higher education enterprise and the federal agencies that help support that to some degree as well. You know, we recognize that talent is at its best, early career talent is at its best in terms of great new ideas, great new directions. And yet, oftentimes, it's much later in one's career that they're able to secure the first NSF grant or the first NIH grant. And so how can we be better about that as a nation, as an ecosystem, as we go forward? And similarly, I think recognizing that it's not just about trying to support research for research's sake, but what's the impact of that work at the end of the day? That's something that my directorate at NSF spends a lot of time thinking about. And so that means maybe we rethink a little bit what promotion and tenure looks like in this country at institutions of higher education, to give credit not just to papers and publications and conference proceedings, which are critically important, but also give credit to the other forms of impact in terms of the outputs of the research that we're trying to enable, contributing to our economy and our competitiveness.
Thank you. I think those are all really important points that we'll dig into throughout the conversation over the next 30 minutes or so. I want to dig in a little bit on the innovation piece and then turn to talent. And Don, you kind of outlined the ingredients that have made America really lead in innovation since World War II. You know, our strong university ecosystem, bringing in talent, having ready venture capital there. As we look to today and maybe out over the next couple of years, where are we strongest and where are some of the warning lights flashing? And what does that mean? How should we be thinking about addressing some of those warning lights? And so, Erwin, maybe I could go to you first on this question, since you do a lot of thinking about how to move forward on innovation, and then welcome any thoughts from others too.
Yeah, so a couple of things, right? I think that, first of all, it's really important for us to think about innovation and talent going hand in hand. So when we talk about sort of being able to support the great breakthroughs in science and in the technologies that underpin AI and their capabilities going forward, I think we care a lot not just about supporting that unlocking of that innovation enterprise, but also unlocking of the talent that you need to be able to help undergird that and support that at the end of the day. And so we really view these initiatives and these investments that we're taking as very much lockstep, hand in glove in terms of bringing innovation together with the talent and vice versa. The other thing that I think is really important for us from an NSF, from an investment portfolio perspective, is recognizing that at the end of the day, the more that we can understand what are the real world challenges that folks are facing and make this something that is going to touch people's lives for the better, the more that I think we can do, we can have that positive impact on the nation and on the economy. And so I think that we really care a lot about not just thinking about innovation by itself, but how do we create the consortia of researchers together with civic leaders, together with private industry, together with the venture capital? How do I bring those sectors together in a way that is much more symbiotic and much more of an accelerant in terms of being able to drive progress than, if you go back and look at the annals of history over the course of the last 30, 40, 50, 80 years, there's great stories of federally funded research at university settings that then eventually makes its way out into the market. And then the market provides some input and feedback on that, and it drives further research. But I think the key question is, how do we make that much more efficient, much more of an effective process by bringing stakeholders together side by side, having those conversations? And so that's why, to me, that innovation and talent piece is so central. In my field of computer science, 20 years ago, 3/4 of PhDs in that field would go into academia. Today, 3/4 of PhDs in that field, we make many more PhDs in computer science, but 3/4 of them go into anywhere but academia. And so there's a richness of talent that helps drive that innovation ecosystem that we need to stitch together in a much more effective way. Otherwise, we have great ideas that end up in a lab somewhere and not making their way out into the marketplace.
Yeah, thanks, Erwin. Does anyone else want to jump in on that? Don, I know that you spent time in the venture capital world, so from your perspective, from that kind of venture VC-backed approach, where are you seeing some of the strengths and weaknesses in this AI innovation environment with so much of innovation coming from the private sector in concert with academia today?
Well, I think a few things. One is I believe that, and I mentioned this in my comments earlier, and this has been, I think, a theme in the report and also the panel so far, is talent. We have the ability to absorb talent from all over the world and to develop talent here, and we need to do both. And we need to do both at breakneck speed, I think. And there are just quite a bit of barriers, even though we do bring in much of the world's talent, to doing it more effectively and efficiently. I think we can just do a much better job of that. And also maintaining the talent once it's here. So, and that can be done through regulatory tweaks and things like that that are easily accomplished. And that will have dramatic upside for us in our innovation cycle, and that will help us technologically here in the United States continue to be an innovative leader. And when you're trying to build a company, the reason why I raise that in response to this is, if you are an entrepreneur and you have a great idea and you want to help build, whether it's on the software or the hardware side, something that's going to have a potential impact in this space, you need people to do it. Ultimately, at the end of the genesis of all of this is people. And you need the people to come and have the great ideas, and then you need the people to execute those ideas. And we should, as this nation's always been a beacon to people from around the world, and that's our strength. And in this particular space, we should double down on that. So I can say some other things, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really helpful, and I think it gets to this theme that's already emerging in our conversation, that you can't really disaggregate talent from innovation, and they're absolutely intertwined, and we should treat them as such as we move forward as a nation. There's a lot of conversation now today around so much of the progress in AI coming from industry. And our report, of course, has a significant amount of recommendations for the government in terms of policies to move forward on innovation and talent. So I'm curious, from all of your perspectives coming from different components of this environment, what is the optimal role of the government versus the private sector in really keeping America at the frontier of AI? And are we maximizing those roles right now to our strategic advantage, or do we need to kind of change and adjust our approach given the rapid development of the technology and the rising geopolitical competition?
I'm happy to jump in. Government and industry and academia, honestly, it's a triangle, all need to work together. From this side of industry, they need to keep doing what they're doing and putting out the best products they can possibly produce. We need the best research possible coming out of our universities, but all of that needs to be enabled and supported by the government. The government needs to have proper supportive programs that help to educate and train our workforce. They also need to put money into infrastructure. Infrastructure is something that I know through all of our research at SESP seems to be a missing link in not just AI, but all the AI-enabled technologies. We need to help build up our energy grid. We need to ensure we have data centers, and so on. And so I really do think that government needs to put more investment in those spaces, and that will help both our industry fill in those gaps with basic R&D, and also help our universities have the support they need to do the best work they can.
Plus one to that, I would say, I think recognizing that the government has a different time horizon they can play with than private sector, like really embracing the fact that if we are at the 1% of this change, and we've learned so much about the implications of other technological leaps, like the implications of social media and the internet for destabilizing institutions. If we're at the dawn of a new era, what are the institutions that are watching this at a different time horizon with a different set of incentives than corporations that are trying to make a profit, as they should, right? Who is paying for the research that is looking at that? Who is getting compute access for a startup ecosystem that is actually diverse with outcomes that aren't just a pathway to acquisition by a few hyperscalers? What are we doing to actually keep an open, innovative ecosystem over the long term, recognizing that some of the short-term incentives might actually lead to concentration? And so I think there's roles for the government to help innovate and guide and incentivize innovation in the sort of Mariana Mazzucato spirit of things. And that's extraordinarily important to recognize. I will also say, as a philanthropy that owns a corporation, there's a really interesting emerging role for philanthropy as risk capital in this moment, to say this is capital that is non-dilutive, does not require a return, and can incentivize some of the convening, the education, the cross-pollination that we need in order to get the widest aperture of people to participate in this moment of change. Particularly because, real talk, we live in a country where there are people who are still not online. The digital divide is deep and exists right now, and we are going to speed run a widening delta between people who can participate in the upside of this innovation moment and the people who will be left behind. And we have to think about the government as a player, as well as other public sector, public-minded institutions, to steward everyone, which might not be the immediate incentive of corporations, but that's okay. We have other players to do that.
So, being in the government, let me offer a perspective on this. I think that we have a very strong role as sort of a catalytic entity, right? We are sort of trying to be in the business of whether it be basic fundamental research that doesn't have a near-term product in mind, right? Whether it be thinking about the talent and the workforce capacity that we need to nurture in this country, and making sure that we're doing that in a way that's inspired by industry's needs, inspired by where that talent is going to go, so that we're not training folks only to discover that when they get to a job, they have to be retrained for the first 6 to 9 months, right? The infrastructure piece, right? The notion that, I mean, we at NSF just announced the relaunch of our SBIR program, the Small Business Innovation Research Program, following the passage of the reauthorization bill by Congress and that being signed into law. And we have a specific pilot emphasis this year on scientific instrumentation to try to be able to help startups and small businesses that are moving in that direction of maybe potentially making available the instrumentation that you need to unlock the next generation of discoveries in science and engineering, helping those find their ways forward, because we know that there's not as much resourcing necessarily from the VC community and elsewhere for those types of enterprises. But I just want to come back to this notion of sort of that catalytic theme that I described. And I'll give you the example of a program that we have been running at NSF for a little while now called the Regional Innovation Engines, or NSF Engines program. The goal of that program is specifically to try to create a framework and provide some resourcing that we hope will be catalytic, that will allow for regions of the country that maybe have been underinvested in, or maybe haven't necessarily been at the forefront of specific technology areas, provide them with the resourcing and the framework that allows them to pull together the coalition of the willing to put on the map what is their region's sort of intellectual strength on a national and potentially on a global stage. So for example, a couple of years ago, we funded 9 engines that each have, almost all of them have a strong AI component associated with them. And they're focused in places like Louisiana around energy innovation. Why Louisiana? Well, at least at that point, 64% of all oil and gas that flowed through the ports of the country flowed through Louisiana. So if you're going to think about energy innovation for the next generation, that's a place to start with all the oil and gas companies partnered as part of that engine. Florida, we funded an engine there that's specifically focusing on the next generation of advanced packaging technologies for semiconductors. You need AI and digital twins to be able to do that effectively, and those technologies also benefit from the next generation of advanced packaging capabilities. The strength in Florida is the only municipal-owned fab in the country, to our knowledge. But here's the interesting thing about these 9 engines. We invested $135 million for the first 2 years of support over a 10-year journey. And already these 9 engines have accrued more than $2 billion in matching commitments from state and local governments, from private industry, from venture capital, from other stakeholders. I like to say to folks, find me another program in the federal government with that return on investment that fast and with that mission in space. So that is, I think, a key role for the federal enterprise, not working in isolation, but working symbiotically together with other sectors and really helping bring folks to the table to help accelerate what we're starting to do.
Thank you. And I think you all touched on elements that the Commission advanced recommendations around, particularly around the infrastructure piece, not just infrastructure for the researchers and the small businesses, but making sure that we're taking the steps to connect the country. So there are connectivity to more rural areas. We're bridging that divide and providing the infrastructure for integration, like Ron was talking about in some of the opening comments, that we have to balance those investments so that we have that infrastructure that supports innovation and integration across the country. And then Erwin, one of the Commission's recommendations was that to keep pace with the development of AI, that the government agencies should pursue novel funding mechanisms to really think about research funding differently and in novel ways. And so I'm glad that you touched on the regional innovation engines as one example from TIP. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate, it was specifically charged by Congress to explore some of these novel funding mechanisms among the many other mandates that you also got from Congress in that bill. Are there any other examples that you wanted to highlight from NSF in terms of how you're moving forward with some of those novel programs?
So I think that the Commission's report speaks to this to some extent as well, in terms of new mechanisms, new modalities, thinking about new types of organizations that we can be supporting as well. So yes, there's the higher education enterprise, and we will continue to support the higher education enterprise. But we've also seen a resurgence over the last few years over the last maybe 5 or 10 years of this notion of focused research organizations, where you can provide for sort of an incubation space for a group of talent to come together to really be focused on a particular hard problem, a fundamental challenge problem, if you will, in a specific area of science and technology, untethered to sort of the bureaucracy that sometimes you have built up over time in government, but also in industry and academia as well. So how do you help provide, card-carrying faculty members a little bit of space where they're not having to balance their research commitments and obligations with also their teaching loads, for instance, right? And so we just in the last few weeks launched the NSF X Labs initiative, which is specifically about trying to be able to provide sort of individual teams of investigators the space and the bandwidth to be able to have a 3 to 5 to 7 year runway to be able to pursue sort of a sector-defining platform technology that could be in the AI space, it could be in related technology spaces that serve to benefit from or help the AI space, but really giving those teams the freedom and the autonomy to be able to say, okay, we're going to hit some milestones that you'll check us on, but we're not going to have to keep coming back to you for proposals and funding every 6 months, every year or so. We'll have the 3 to 5 to 7 year runway to really provide for that transformational breakthrough in a particular area. So the analogy that I give, Tess, is Jennifer Doudna and all of the colleagues who worked on getting us to CRISPR-Cas. Well, that was a 3-decade-plus endeavor that required many grant proposals, many grant reviews and awards, and lots of puts and takes, right? Well, is there a way to bring together that talent in a focused research organization or an X Lab that has the runway and can maybe accelerate that time curve in an era where the pace of technology is really what matters more than anything else?
Yeah. So maybe digging deeper into the talent piece that you just ended on, Erwin. Nabia, at Mozilla, you've really emphasized the importance of human skills and creativity, ingenuity as really crucial components of American innovation. So what actions do you think should be taken to strengthen this component of the talent picture when it comes to AI, really looking at that big talent picture, not just the computer scientists that are doing the research in academia and industry?
Yeah, it's so tempting in moments of deep competition to say, do we have the best researchers? Do we have the best engineers? Do we have the most compute? Are we going the fastest? So tempting. And also the history of American imagination and innovation is that we have a very wide on-ramp of who we invite in to be part of that innovation experience with us, right? So the GI Bill brought in 2.2 million veterans to build the post-war science boom. Land-grant universities fueled so much of our American R&D. These are stories of saying, can we widen the aperture and bring more people in to help imagine what good looks like? One of my favorite examples of imagination from unexpected angles is actually the creation of the spreadsheet. So personal computers existed, okay? They were sitting and like hobbyists were tinkering with them, like people were playing around. But it wasn't until 1979 when a business student was watching his professors hand fill out tables to say, like, I wonder if you could automate that. Like, that seems really boring. I think we could probably do a better job. And then decided to make VisiCalc, right? VisiCalc in 1979 was the first spreadsheet, which of course made the Apple IIe all of a sudden a need to have if you were in business. You don't want to be left behind. That didn't come from the person who invented the computer, right? That came from a person in a different discipline who saw the potential for how this could be applied to what they do. And I think we talk a lot about AI literacy, which is understanding what AI is, and that is necessary. I would like us to make the leap to AI fluency, which is actually knowing where to apply the technology and where not to. What might be a waste of time and what might be very exciting and accelerate pain points that are felt by people who are closest to the problem. And so in order to do that, right, what an incredible opportunity to have an enormous, dynamic, well-capitalized, innovative country. How are we inviting all of those minds in? Because even if we can't out-compute, more command economies, we can out-imagine them, right? Because we have the resource to do that if we allocate them appropriately. What does that mean tangibly? So interdisciplinary approaches, we are funding a lot of that work at Mozilla, a lot of affirmative imagination work, so people can think Star Trek, not Blade Runner when they think about the future. And it sounds cute, it sounds adorable, but actually public imagination is what motivates people to be part of an innovation ecosystem. Like my parents were engineers who came to this country because they looked at America and they said, that's where you can build stuff. Right? And that means something for talent acquisition over time. And to maintain that public imagination, to continue to draw people in is necessary, absolutely necessary. Protecting the on-ramp so you don't have young people who are tapping out saying, AI is gonna take my job, everyone's telling me it's going to, so I'm just like gonna play games and go on like Polymarket all day, right? How do you actually motivate people to participate is really important, and spending time to do that is crucial, right? How do we create these on-ramps to invite people in to feel not like they are playing catch up with innovation, but they're co-creating its future? And that requires education, interdisciplinary outreach, investment in startups, investment in young entrepreneurs, giving people a stake in what's happening, not the risk of feeling they're going to be left behind.
Yeah, that's a really powerful point. And so, Dawn, I'd like to turn to you. The commission put forward a series of recommendations in the report around actions that the United States should take to retain, attract, really adapt the talent needed to continue to move forward in AI and continue to lead. From your perspective, what are some of the most important or the recommendations you would highlight among those as really essential?
I touched on some of this a little bit earlier. I mean, the first thing I would do is go to the H-1B system, and I would expand the number of H-1B visas that are granted. I would expand the categories for which we'll grant visas. I would expedite them, and if you can't do it across the board, at least in certain categories that will help us support the development of this technology. And then I would transform the visa so that once you're here, you can move between employers for a certain period of time in certain professions. I think even those changes, which are things that are doable through regulation, would have a profound impact here. One of the things I've always thought about, I've had the good fortune of traveling around much of the world in my life and career, and I've represented many technology companies, and I've seen their operations as, the United States innovates with the talent from the entire world coming here. And we've been exceptionally successful in doing that. But some of our near-peer competitors now have done it just with domestic talent. And I think it's important we understand that. And that in order for us to continue to run, this is a race, I think was how it was put in the report. The way to win a race is to run faster. And I think the capacity to do that within the United States is largely fueled by talent. And we need to get the world's talent here to continue to innovate. So H-1Bs would be one thing. Allowing people to bring families would also help us attract more talent. Coming up with certain categories of vocations that are supportive of the AI industry as well. They may be vocational, maybe on paper, but they're going to help us build data centers. They're going to help us potentially build new fabs, those sorts of professions as well. I think we should look for people, if we can't find the talent here, we should look for that abroad. But we should also spend a lot of time, and I think government has a role to play, of creating new pathways for people in the United States to get that talent and develop that talent. And everything I just said is in addition to building out the infrastructure of talent here in the United States. I am the son of immigrants, but I was born here, and I went to our schools and our system, and I feel like we can do a lot more as a nation to accelerate talent here. Everyone that's in the United States has the capacity to contribute, and that should also be a focus as well.
Yeah, I think when it comes to talent, it really should be a yes and for all of the pieces of that talent puzzle. So before we open it to questions for the audience, I want to ask Jenny a question based on the fact that you served on the National Security Commission on AI staff, as did I, full transparency, which put forward a set of recommendations for the country back in 2021 that have still, many of which have really remained foundational to the policy conversations around AI. So I'd love to hear your perspective on any lessons learned for this commission in terms of moving some of the recommendations into real change. And maybe pair that with, at the end of the day today, we are going to have Senators Young and Hickenlooper with us. So welcome your take on, where might there be some opportunity on the congressional side of things to move forward on some of these kind of really weighty issues?
Sure. I'd like to start by saying so much has changed and so much hasn't changed since the NSAI final report. I think on the one hand, that report was written for an AI future. that future's here. And so the pace in which we all need to move is much, much faster. And many of those recommendations, 111 of them were adopted by statute, and many more were incorporated into administrative action and counting. And again, it's been 5 years. So I would say my biggest recommendation to the Atlanta Council is one, try to move fast, try to find your champions, but also be a little patient. Things do get across the finish line. NSCAI was a huge supporter of the CHIPS and Science Act, that and science piece that helped codify TIP and create those engine programs and the EDA tech hubs and the NAIR pilot, all of those things that are still going strong and hopefully will continue to have congressional support. It also had, a little outside of the scope of this conversation, a recommendation to change the way DoD can contract for software, making it more flexible. That is finally in the House chairman's mark of the NDAA. So 5 years, actually more than that, because that was in a quarterly report from 2020. So I think, stay on it, stick with it. Thank you for carrying forward so many of the concepts that were in the NSAI. Double down. Again and again, H-1B visas, that was in the NSAI final report. We're with you, here to support you in moving that forward. The same as the tech entrepreneur visa. So I think, just staying patient, but also finding ways to get common ground on the Hill. I think if you go to both sides of the aisle, there's agreement that AI is really important. That's important to our national security. It's important to our economy. It's important to our nation's future. It's just the devil's in the details. And if you can just have frank conversations and talk about the little ways that you can move the ball forward, you'll see progress.
Thank you. We'll open it up for questions. In the room, if you just raise your hand, and we have some runners, we'll take one question from the room, and then we'll go to one online. And please state your name and affiliation if you can.
Hello there, William Winkler from the GW University, grad student there. We've seen recent laws passed in China, for example, that you cannot, or that AI cannot take over a job from another person. Would you encourage similar laws here in the United States? And if so, because we've constantly heard that China is our biggest competitor in this race, if our biggest competitor is doing something like that, should we adapt similar ways, or should we take that as something where we can even get further ahead? Thank you.
It's a great question, Annie.
I'm happy to take a stab at that. First of all, go GW. I'm an alum. Yes. I think the U.S., we have a very different government structure, and I don't think we should be as heavy-handed and say that you cannot use AI in place of humans. But I do think that there is an imperative to create the conditions for which AI and humans can work together, and I think our government can help set that tone with policy choices, some governance of AI. Maybe at the federal level, that would be nice, and not just at the state level. But I think we we don't need a China approach, we need an American approach.
I think an American approach to providing that confidence, though, makes a lot of sense. Because if you think about the incentive for people to adopt a technology that they're frequently being told will replace them, it's not a compelling narrative, right? It's not encouraging. It's not a surprise that people are resisting, rejecting, protesting, booing commencement speakers if that is what's being sold to them. And so thinking about the broader incentive system that will say, look, a shift is happening, and it is true in every shift. If you ask, horse and buggy drivers what they thought about the car, they were not fans, but this is much wider than that all at the same time. What can we be doing to create incentives for people to at least feel taken care of? And you can see this in global sentiment analysis of how people feel about AI. It's not just China. It's not just command economies where the confidence of AI improving their lives is high. It's also Indonesia. It's also in so many countries where people believe that their government will work for them and support them, that they're excited. And the United States is the lowest confidence ranking of any Western country because people do not believe that their country will take care of them. And I think we do have work to do to provide that assurance to people who live here.
Yeah, the more that we can provide everyday Americans with a sense of sort of what this means for them in their daily lives and how it can be a positive impact on their daily lives, I think the more we are better off for it at the end of the day. So I'll just give you one example of an initiative that we've started just in the last few months, AI Ready America, where the objective really is to try to be able to go meet folks in rural communities, in where they are, and help them understand or help them surface what are the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis, right? Maybe it's a transportation issue. Maybe it's an issue around getting health care delivered to their grandma or their grandfather, right? Whatever the issue is, folks learn best by example, and folks learn best by doing themselves, right? I know that's me, right? When I was learning how to code, it was learning through example more than anything else. And so if we give folks the opportunity to be able to see, okay, here are the everyday challenges that I face in my backyard, and here's how I can leverage AI and a better understanding of AI to be able to help address some of those challenges, co-create, co-design, I think that's the moment at which you start to unlock folks' imagination, back to something we said earlier. That's the moment at which you start to help folks be able to see, okay, this is a path forward where I can engage and I can be an effective producer and not just a passive consumer of whatever is being told to me.
Okay, we're going to go to one of the questions submitted by someone joining us remotely. So the question is, on the theme of education reform, there's a tension between a durable and equitable system on one hand and speed and scale on the other. Are we willing to accept a fragmented AI education landscape where corporate-served school district get cutting-edge AI training while under-resourced districts fall further behind? Or do we need to appropriate dedicated federal funding, accept slower scaling, and build toward true equity? It's a tough one. Don, you want to be brave and jump in?
As someone who has absolutely no background in education other than having been educated, I don't know if I'm the right person, but I do have children, and I do believe in this, and I mentioned this earlier, that in general, this isn't a problem that's isolated, obviously, to AI education. There's a broader issue in how we pay for education and fund education in America. I think that was beyond the remit of the report. So I'll just keep to this. I think government has a role to play. And I do think it's to help people sort of throughout the country understand the technology, be able to utilize the technology, and to teach everyone how the technology works. And one of the things I've thought a lot about is, having seen my children use it and others, is it's interesting. The younger people, I think, that use it more think of it more as a tool. Whereas some of the older people who have come to it late, like my parents who are in their 80s, think of it as like a magic trick, like they're at Delphi speaking to the oracle. But that has suggested to me that young people understand how it can be used a little bit better. If they can be properly educated as to how it works, they would also understand its strengths, its weaknesses, and all of that would make, I think, would benefit us. And I think that's something that the government can facilitate through funding and through other programs where it's needed. And I do think in general that will also help some of the other issues we've talked about, which is the more folks use it, the more they understand it, the more they may become comfortable with it, and it may become an accelerator as opposed to something that competes with them.
Yeah, does anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I'll just say that I think that maybe to build off of your comments, I think it's we have to recognize that it's an entire ecosystem that is our education enterprise in this country. It's not just at the federal level. It's not just at the state and local level, right? It's an entire ecosystem. It's not just to the person who's asking a very thoughtful question. It's not just about school districts and classrooms, but it's about parents and the teachers themselves. How do we help provide the teachers with the understanding of and the competencies to be able to help train their classrooms around AI and some of these capabilities at varying levels, right? So I think that at the end of the day, the inherent tension here is also one of opportunity at some level. We should be thinking about, I think, that full spectrum of preparedness that we need to offer. We need to empower teachers, we need to empower parents, and we need to empower our students and talent through what they might get in a classroom setting, but what they might also get in informal learning settings that go beyond the classroom as well.
Yeah. We'll take another question from the audience. Right there.
We good? Hi, Paul Dempsey with ENT. From the accent, I don't want to be Banquo's ghost, but a lot of what you just talked about was outreach, specifically with the H-1B. The title of today is How the US and Allies Can Win in AI. There seems to be a deliberate policy here that is moving diametrically opposed to that. With reference to H-1B, for example, there's now the new regime for green cards, which will expect people who want to graduate from the H-1B to go home and therefore potentially risk the job they have here. And then if we want to look at this on a broader base, I only have to look at Five Eyes, the relationship the US currently has with Canada, the Saab procurement that we all saw last week, and that's just one of a number of examples. As I said, I looked through the report. A lot of it is about outreach, but I'm afraid to say, speaking as a Brit, a lot of what I see coming from just down the road is going in the other direction. So I really want to get some comment from you on that. Thank you.
Okay, anyone want to comment on that?
I'll just say that it is important for the U.S. to work with our allies and partners. We don't have the solution to everything, and seriously, and we don't necessarily have the foundational materials that you need to power AI or mostly or really the AI-enabled technologies like critical minerals. They're not here. So we need to work with our allies and partners to ensure that we are stronger together, honestly. So I agree with you. I wasn't party to the report, but I know that they did put a lot of thought into working with allies and partners, and hopefully their recommendations will set the tone for future policymaking.
And that's actually, unfortunately, we're out of time, and that's actually potentially the best transition to our next conversation, which is on allies and partners and securing the AI stack. So please join me in thanking our panelists for their time and insights today. And then we will pass it to Graham Brookie and our other panelists to continue the conversation.
All right, thank you so much. And I know that we're transitioning the room here, but we'll go ahead and get started because this is a very rich conversation. So first and foremost, thanks to Tess for leading the last conversation. She was correct in that the last question was a perfect seg into this session, securing the AI stack, America, allies, and the race for advantage. And so we're going to spend the next 50 minutes diving into this. We will have Q&A among ourselves for a little while, and then we'll turn to the audience and our online audience as well using hashtag AskAC to get some questions from you all as well. So first and foremost, I want to thank our panelists, Rishi Bhaskar, who's Senior Director at Amazon Web Services, leading many of their global partnerships, Samuel Hammond, who is the Director of Artificial Intelligence Policy and the Chief Economist at the Foundation for American Innovation, and Ambassador Jovita Liupsini, noting that Lithuania is not my first language. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. I'm really excited because this conversation is so broad, and many of the chapters across the Atlantic Council's AI Commission touched on a lot of the things that could be considered supply chain security and working with allies and partners, which is at the core of the Atlantic Council's mission. So I'll dive in with a very broad question first and foremost, and many of the questions are hinged to the Commission's findings. Over the last 8 months, many of our commissioners, industry leaders, civil society leaders, governmental leaders have informed a lot of these recommendations, and so our job here today is to continue to inform those recommendations. First and foremost, the Commission found American strength scales with allies, which sounds fairly obvious in the post-World War II history, although it's a little contested based on how the AI tech stack is distributed right now, based on this era of rising geopolitical competition. And so for all of you, and I'll go, Rishi, if it's all right, I'll start with you. For all of you, how can and should the United States work most effectively with partners in this emerging era of AI, noting that American strength scales with allies? What sticks out as the very first order of priority as this technology develops?
Yeah, this is first off, it's a global ecosystem that drives this technology. And if anyone thinks there's only one country or one ecosystem provider that can meet the requirements of the world as we move up the stack into AI, then that's not the right approach. So we firmly believe that this is an ecosystem-driven opportunity that starts with the infrastructure layer. And the infrastructure layer is the key to AI leadership across the allied nation. And without that infrastructure, we're not going to be able to meet AI leadership requirements that are required across the world right now. And that AI leadership component is so critical around interoperability and making sure that between the allied nations, we have the right tech stack, we have the right validated security posture, we have the right technology deployed in the right fabrics on the right infrastructure, and we can control a little bit of our own destiny. I think that's the key point from an infrastructure perspective, and we've all kind of thought through what it looks like in a chipset world, and how do we actually make sure we're working together with our allies around the world to make sure we have the right supply infrastructure to take advantage of the AI opportunity that's evolving, but in an allied way, in an interoperable way, with the right security posture across the full stack. I think if we set the right premise and the right guidelines, which much of the Commission report is starting to do, we can roll out this technology and drive the right leadership around the allied nations.
Sam?
Is this on? Check. I'd second all that, obviously. I think there's an appetite in various countries around the world to compete in AI in some vague, abstract sense where, not every country is going to be able to have their own Anthropic or OpenAI, simply because these companies are leveraging vast amounts of compute that would be redundant, but also outside the means of many middle powers. So there's this open question, where does that leave our allies, and particularly our so-called middle powers, countries that have a seat at the table but aren't as big as the US or China? And I think the opportunities are kind of limitless, right? So, in the United States, you sometimes hear about full stack tech companies, but there are no full stack tech companies. No full stack so-called tech company controls critical mineral extraction, controls chip fabrication, controls the thousands of subcomponents that go into the semiconductor supply chain, much less have their own energy supply. And so all these different areas, I think, are going to depend on allies and partners to shore up and to secure. But I think it's also broader than AI. I think every country will have to look at their own comparative advantage and say, am I going to be a frontier model developer? Probably not, but can I compete on applications? Could I compete on other parts of the stack? But then looking beyond AI, AI is going to power a revolution in manufacturing and robotics that expands the opportunities for other countries to engage, whether that's solar panels, batteries, various parts of the electrical stack. This aperture is going to widen. It's one where the U.S. is particularly weak. Right, so if we end up in a world where we develop the most powerful superintelligence in the box, but don't have like the secure supply chains for the robots that are going to be, building our factories and so forth, then we aren't really that sovereign. We may have sovereignty over the intelligence, but not sovereignty over the physical infrastructure.
So we're going to come back to the stack as well as this balance between integration and innovation here momentarily. But Madam Ambassador, from your perspective, working with the United States, how would you like to see America scale strength with allies?
Well, I think that colleagues already started to mention, because if we really are serious speaking about stack, it's I would wish luck actually to hope that it's only US stack, because if we're speaking about AI, it's a question about supply chains. And I think we all already learned several lessons that speaking about resilience and security is not really just an empty phrases. So if we really are keen here to make sure that it's security, safety, and resilience is the reality, we have to speak about reliable, trusted vendors, make sure that we have a similar approach to standards, we have a similar approach to certification, and we have a proper and resilient supply chains. And you can look around the world, and I think that in general, out of 200 countries, you can probably name 46, 50 countries which could fall into this, and well, I hope all 27 EU countries is part of that, and some of the findings of the Commission actually speaks about quite eloquently.
So speaking of trusted vendors, Rishi, a big part of your job is partnership, and you happen to work for an industry leader that is headquartered in the United States that works with allies and partners. And so what does that look like in practice when you're co-creating or navigating this moment where you're trying to build trust, trying to build business, but also create an infrastructure layer to compete effectively in this AI moment across allies and partners?
Graham, this is a really great question, and I just spent 2 weeks in Europe answering a lot of these questions with some of our partners and our customers. I think that we had to sort of peel the onion on a couple layers. So first off, the innovation that comes out of an organization like AWS leads the world in things like compute and storage and AI. And I think what's super important is making sure we deliver that in the context where our allied nations and our neighboring countries can accept it. And so if we trace back what AWS did several years ago, is we committed to building the European Sovereign Cloud. And that was a 7.8 billion euro investment that we put forward and now has launched earlier this year. And that enables sovereignty that's defined by the EU, that's staffed by EU citizens, that's operated by Europeans. So it's not just another AWS region in another country, it is actually a sovereign cloud deployment for Europe. And so I think it's really important to deliver our technology with our partners in the context of how our neighboring countries and our allied countries can accept it and operate at scale. And I think the other piece that's super important is to always remember that when we deploy our 200 plus services into those regions, those services are delivered on years of innovation and R&D that really helps drive our partners and our customers up the stack. So what ends up happening is our partners come into our European sovereign cloud and they deploy their software in the European sovereign cloud. So you're not just getting the world's leading compute and storage infrastructure and the AI platform that we deliver, but you're getting the entire ecosystem of software providers and systems integrators that deliver in the context locally to those mission requirements by every customer. So I think it's multiple layers, Graham, to get into how do you make sure the infrastructure is trusted, how do you make sure you have the right partners delivering on the right solutions driven in local context.
To ask a pointed and topical question, is there a kill switch?
So I'm not going to speculate on hypotheticals, but what I can tell you is the methodology in which how we've designed and architected our infrastructure, not only in the European sovereign cloud, but around the world, is to create no single dependency. There is no single dependency. If you look at how we deploy our AI stack in a platform we call Bedrock, we've enabled all of the large language model and frontier model providers, even that Sam had mentioned in the opening. And so if you have a model provider that's not meeting a requirement that you have, you simply switch over to another one without re-architecting your system. We have a security posture across multiple fabrics of security that essentially the end customers own the keys to that data and encryption. So there's really no single point of failure and single point of dependency that enables a hypothetical situation, if everyone wanted to dream it up, that would impact our customers. Our focus is deploying the right infrastructure in the right place, in the right context for our customers to take advantage of it.
I really, truly appreciate the deeply substantive answer to a rather pithy question. When you're building resilience across an entire supply chain, the point is resilience. The point is building no single points of failure. And so having a hypothetical kill switch in your pocket for a huge technological ecosystem is fairly nonsensical in this moment of AI if we're making recommendations that this is actually an entire ecosystem of technologies happening in chorus. So I deeply appreciate that. I want to talk about the stakes of getting this right, the stakes of global competition. And so the commission found, just to reiterate, the United States should champion an allied AI stack built on interoperable standards, to your first point, Rishi, shared institutions, and a credible counter-narrative to authoritarian influence or to authoritarian approaches to this technology. Sam, you've written a good deal on systemic competition on AI. How do you interpret the stakes of this moment right now in getting it right, working across close partners?
Yeah, the stakes are really hard to overstate. I mean, depending on your projection of where AI is headed, it could be the state of the future of humanity on Earth, or it could be the state of who gets to control this part of the Milky Way. And this is stakes that we haven't dealt with before. And I think the things that I care about are more values-based, which are what are the initial conditions of AI as it begins to take over the economy, take over the world, and take over the galaxy? What values are embedded in those systems? And when I look around at other parts of the world, I see countries with very different value systems, different than ours. Maybe they work for them, but I value my freedom. I value my civil liberty, and so. But at the same time, I think AI is going to be incredibly disruptive, both to incumbent economic actors, but also to just broader civil institutions. And anytime we've seen major technological transitions like this in the past, even as recently as the internet, we saw a wave of various kinds of institutional destabilization, like the Arab Spring. And how did those countries respond to the Arab Spring? Well, they responded by architecting stronger surveillance states to try to control information and prevent instability. And all these sort of risks that come with AI, whether it's bio, cyber, broader ability for non-state actors to coordinate more effectively, I anticipate there to be a lot more instability in the near future, and also a lot more demand for technologies of control and surveillance, which AI happens to be as well. And so I think part of this role, part of the stakes are how do we embed our values in this technology, but also how do we fill a market gap? Because there's going to be demand from countries for technologies that restore some semblance of order. And are there ways that we can supply those technologies in a way that engineer in privacy and civil liberty concerns while addressing the core sources of unrest?
Madam Ambassador, there's a growing trend of digital sovereignty or AI sovereignty in the United States, across EU member states, and around the world. So when we're talking about building an allied stack, or a stack that is interoperable among allies and partners, are those two trends at odds, the trend of digital sovereignty and interoperability?
Well, I think that quite the opposite. They go together. You can still seek for the sovereignty, but be pretty open. And I think that Europe is one of the best examples for that. As Rish was mentioning, one of our aims is to make sure that we have the product or AI which actually accommodates our requirements, our rules and regulations. But on the other hand, we have a right to set those rules and regulations the way our citizens see them and willing so. So it's on one hand you have to make sure that third-party high-risk actors would not get access, but on the other hand, if you think that EU is investing in 19 gigafactories, and you look around the world who will do that, it's pretty clear that it will be with the help of our allies and partners. So I think that it's not a theoretical question, but it requires very deep consideration. But it's manageable. It's not exclude one another.
When, as a follow-up question, when the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen laid out her vision and mandate on AI governance, I think last year or 18 months ago, she centered competitiveness as the central theme, building up European competitiveness, which a lot of the language from the United States right now is focused on US competitiveness. In fact, the focus of this commission is US competitiveness. In the speech in which she laid this out, she mentioned the US and China as competitors. Could you follow up on the characterization of both as competitors? How is your job in interacting with that perception? And is that healthy competition, or is it kind of elbows out competition?
Well, I will leave to define the US and China competition to my American friends here. I think that for us, what is extremely important is, nobody wants to be left behind. And for us, the investment either in the data centers or in AI application or in cloud is based on the prospects that First, we exclude not trusted or high-risk third-party actors. That's one element. Another element, I think that we have to take into account when we are talking about AI or AI stack. Even in your research, I think that there is a 67 supply areas where supply chains are dependent on the European supplies. Mm-hmm. And like 80% of the imports actually coming to build AI comes from Europe as well. So I think that's and I'm not going to come here and preach. I think by now everybody already learned what is ACML and what kind of the impact it has globally, but as well on US. Infineon power components having a actually a critical inputs for example for building NVIDIA chips, and then NVIDIA chips actually, or NVIDIA will be probably a prominent player in building European gigafactories in one or at least several instances, and and so on and so forth. So I think that's the competition. Yes, it's healthy. It's important to keep the investments open for this competition, but I don't see how Europeans right now will start building, our AI stack with what we call not trusted vendors, but probably in US you call China.
I appreciate that. And this is what alliances are made out of, right? Mutual interest, shared values, shared purpose, and yes, some amount of codependencies that are hopefully helpful and bind us together. And so for Sam and Rishi, are there security or interoperability trade-offs if more like-minded or partner countries seek sovereign approaches to AI, in your opinion?
So I'm a little biased to infrastructure. And so I think the infrastructure enables an open ecosystem for collaboration and interoperability. And we can do that in multiple layers. You talked a little bit about competition as well. I think competition is a great thing for all of us to stay on our toes and stay active. But I think what's super important in that deployment of that interoperable stack and that security layer is to actually go through the accreditation process that meets sovereign requirements per country. And there's multiple ways to do that. We already talked about the European Sovereign Cloud, but there's other offerings that something we announced back in December, which is AI Factories, which essentially takes the full AWS stack and puts it in your environment. And so I don't think you can get much more data residency and sovereign than that, right? And so there's always innovation that we're looking at to make sure we can meet that global competitive requirement, make sure we drive the right AI capabilities into our customer environment, and quite frankly, foster AI leadership across the ally nation. So I think security, interoperability, infrastructure all go hand in hand across the global supply chain.
I think interoperability matters, standards matter, but I think they're mattering less and less. And I think AI is actually one of the reasons for that. And ever since the French Revolution, I think the continent in Europe has had a sort of obsession of standards. We went from having 100 and something dialects of French to having one standardized French, and that was the way it was going to be. The thing of AI is like you can have a translator between all those different dialects, and you get to be interoperable through the AI. And so I think there's a sense in which the obsession of standards can be a bit of a drag. And what should be more the focus, especially for Europe, is focusing on core fundamentals. Is it easy to build? Can they, is it possible to even train a model given the copyright directive? What are the startup ecosystems saying? How hard is it to raise capital? Are there too many thickets of regulation for diffusing AI to lower risk use cases? And those, I think, are the areas where they're currently stumbling, in part because they raced to put out standards before having the technology to standardize in the first place. And so, I personally worry about Europe falling behind in AI, less for Lithuania, more for France. I think is actually to me has been the sore thumb, is that we need to understand that AI is moving faster than the European Commission could potentially regulate, and whether it's the EU AI Act or GDPR or other of these major continent-wide standards, many of these were developed years before the core technology that they're now affecting, and are rapidly becoming outmoded. And I particularly worry that Europe doesn't really have a great process for reviewing and reconsidering things once they're in place.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to come back to the EU of it all here momentarily, because we're expecting a digital omnibus in this season, in which we're focused on some of the governance standards which have impacts transatlantically. But Sam, how should allied governments coordinate on export control? So where we're talking about interoperability and working together, how should allied governments coordinate on keeping certain things away from either adversaries or competitors with elbows out, as it were?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time working on export controls, especially vis-a-vis China and chips, for really two reasons. One is the values reason, the stakes that we talked about, that China would be more than willing to export technologies of surveillance and control to countries that want them, that don't have protections for civil liberties, democracy, and other things baked into them. The other is one of sort of getting there first. And what do I mean by getting there first? It's not as if there's like some finish line that we're all racing towards, but it's things like mythos. So the chip export controls that we've had in place, beginning under the first Trump administration, greatly expanded under the Biden administration, have severely curtailed China's access to large scales of NVIDIA chips in particular. What that means is that even though you see companies like DeepSeek coming out with models that are comparable with US frontier models with maybe an 8-month lag, they don't have the capacity to deploy that at scale, much less to run thousands of copies trying to hack different code bases or what have you. And so the fact that we had that large compute advantage owing to export controls, even net of smuggling and things like that, is one of the reasons why we're both able to get to advanced cyber capabilities first, and then you have that window of opportunity to deploy those models defensively. And I think this is going to be something that becomes increasingly important. When it comes to coordination, one of the challenges here is that the chips are just sort of the final product. NVIDIA, we're lucky, has a 9% plus market share in these chips. But when it comes to the advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment that China is importing to indigenize their own chip production, it's companies like ASML that we mentioned. And ASML derives a significant portion of the revenue currently from China. They still provide servicing to Chinese companies. And there's been this ongoing tension between sort of alignment or harmony between US export controls and export controls in the Netherlands or other places where they have an interest. And sometimes they do come into alignment, but with a lag, and a lag that gives US companies sort of a disadvantage because we get cut off. ASML or whomever gets another 6 months of unfettered market access before falling into alignment. And that's something that needs to change, I think.
Is there any partner country that you would like to see have the most advanced chips that isn't the United States?
Me personally? I'm a Canadian citizen, so you know my answer.
But in terms of driving this conversation on innovation versus integration, which countries need to be prioritized for integration and integrating across a partner ecosystem? For instance, AWS supports an enormous international business that provides cloud infrastructure to the world in many cases. And there is a key tension between US policy right now, which a lot of the AI action plan is basically like the movie The Martian. Like, we're just gonna science the hell out of this and we'll figure it out. We're gonna out-innovate the world as opposed to integrate this technology across allies and partners. And so when it comes to export control and prioritizing diplomacy that leads to the integration of more AI around the world, what does that look like in practice? And we'll go down the...
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, I think this is one area where the US is failing badly. I just had a piece in American Affairs Journal discussing the US-China race and how we see these races differently. I think in the US, our tech founders are sort of 100% focused on getting to AGI, artificial general intelligence, superintelligence, this genius god and machine god in a box, and sort of have thought much less about diffusing these models and actually having them reach useful applications. In China, it's the inverse. In China, while they don't have the compute to race at that frontier, they are deeply prioritizing, in the form of like 5-year targets for their private sector adoption of AI, the actual diffusion and useful applications. And you can do a lot of useful applications with weaker models. And so I look to a world where we're the first to develop AGI or whatever the final thing is, but they're the first to actually diffuse it and deploy it in useful, especially in manufacturing and things that drive tangible output. For us to catch up on that, it's going to require more than just a simple policy change. I think it requires a sort of almost whole of government approach to how we regulate and how we incentivize businesses to adopt these technologies.
Rishi?
Yeah, I want to point out that we're sort of at this point in this conversation because of the infrastructure that's already been built, and Madam Ambassador talked about it. We've got the collaboration between the allied nations. AWS alone has 120 availability zones around the world across 38 regions. Mm-hmm. So I would suggest the infrastructure is already there. Now it's about getting the policy right to enable that infrastructure at scale. And unfortunately, sometimes it's overregulated, right? So lowering the barrier of entry for some of these hundreds of thousands of partners in our ecosystem that deliver unique solutions on top of the infrastructure to drive a very specific outcome, that's an important opportunity to make sure we're not over-regulating our countries around the world are not over-regulating the barrier to enable that innovation. And I think that's super important as we go forward in this rapidly evolving world.
Well, the Commission found that one of the choke points, not in cloud or digital infrastructure, but one of the choke points in the United States, for instance, is our power infrastructure or our energy infrastructure, which if you're competing in the era of AI and most of your grid was deployed online during the Carter administration, then we've got some updating and building to do, while trying to manage the fact that there is the potential for unlimited demand, increased efficiency gains across the AI tech stack, et cetera. So figuring out how to balance those priorities and update infrastructures is something that allies and partners definitely need to figure out.
And you will have to figure out how you deal with the public opinion.
Right.
And your energy bills. And your, at a certain point, energy networks and infrastructure, which will probably have something to do with a huge pressure of coming from the data centers. But I think that it's, and I think these are the problems which I think all the allies around the world who actually relies very, very much on the American AI and out-innovating the other partner is looking forward and very worried what's going to happen, as the same as Americans are very worried that when we over-regulating. Well, just to make facts on the ground, 95% of AI in Europe is not regulated. The 5% is, which is high-risk models, which mostly concerns health and personal data, is regulated. But because of our constant conversations with mostly the developers of AI, is postponed. The implementation is postponed to the end of 2027. So I would be very careful in pushing that someone is over-regulating. The problem is that EU is 27 small and medium member countries, which is to scale in Europe is a bit complicated. So lots of the AI startups, which were started in some of them were born in Europe, were financed by European monies. The innovation leaders, the engineers trained in Europe, they end up in the US. Because this is where you can scale up in a lot of the situation. One issue probably which actually puts a bit of the guardrails for us is definitely finance and how we actually have a possibility to finance our innovations, especially the financial market, which is still 27 financial markets, not one. We've been speaking about it too long, and I can take that criticism. Another element which I think we all have to face in Europe and at this particular moment in history and other parts of the world is actually prices of energy. How we really manage. Well, I hope that quantum computing will help us because there's a bit less of energy intense there. But for the AI, we'll still have to find the ways around, and hopefully AI will help to solve the energy prices and energy consumption as well.
If it's any area of consolation, in the United States, we also have this patchwork of regulatory frameworks right now, where we're navigating 50 states of disagreement on approaches to AI governance, which is touched on in the Commission report as well.
Yes, you have 1,500 regulations at the state level, and I think one thing which actually, or AI or digital issues related regulations, one thing which I think that sometimes is underappreciated in Europe. That be careful what you wish for, because if it's not one regulation on AI or on data, it will be 27, which I don't think any of the companies would wish to end up.
Should we expect anything on this issue of allies and partners and streamlining some of those approaches? Is there anything that we should expect from this huge kind of repackaging of EU digital approaches or regulatory approaches in the omnibus that's coming up?
I hope it's not only repackaging. That's the worst. What can happen? I think that we have AI Act, we have Cloud Act, we have Chips Act, and we have GDPR, which is on data. And I think that it's a long time overdue to have one stop shop, so you don't need to do a report to each agency around Europe. We have a strange cookie policy, which we have to streamline. We have some overlaps in the GDPR. We actually, I think that the colleagues will not let me lie. We have really a lot of engagement with the companies. It happens to be that the major companies in the digital and AI area are American companies. Where are those shortcomings? Commission put the proposal. The question is, of course, it's always in the democracies. It takes some time to go through the European Parliament. So hopefully, we will manage.
Would welcome questions from the audience, and we have a few mic runners that are running around. We'll start here. Mic's coming right behind you.
Just stand up too. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Hafsa Benzi. I am a dermatologist and clinical researcher at Mount Sinai, and I work at the intersection of bioethics, AI governance, and accountable, explainable AI in translational precision medicine. So my question is for you. So you spoke about chips, cloud, energy as the visible AI stacks. But my question is about how we should treat biomedical data infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Is it maybe like nowadays we treat it as a health IT issue instead of treating it as strategic assets in AI competitiveness, in biodefense, genomic security, quick response, when we will face, or hope not, biological threats? Thank you.
So I interpret that as with very highly set, we need data in order to train models and compete effectively. Some of that data, especially in the medical field, is highly sensitive. In the United States, we would call that PII. How do we navigate that among allies and partners? Noting that this is well-tread territory.
I think that for us, of course, the health and bioethics is probably one of the most what we consider the areas where the risk arise if, for example, the data is misused or lost. So that's definitely true. But I would say that the EU-US data privacy framework is the framework where legal framework which actually allows the free flow of data between EU and US. We have 3,500 companies, roughly, from US as part of this framework. So this actually gives, I think that it's one of the probably the best examples where we can actually work together to make sure that we have a legal certainty. And I think that for what European consumers or European citizens expect, actually legal protection as well.
Is this the hinge point between realizing like ubiquitous democracy in the era of AI versus surveillance model, Sam?
For bio specifically, I'm not too sure. I haven't thought too much about this. I do think biology has some of the greatest upside from near-term AI, and one of the ways you get that upside is by having scaled data. In the UAE, the Emiratis have all been compelled to do their genome sequence, and which is also not ideal. But what that means is that if any Emirati gets sick, they have like very targeted precision medicine. Are there ways where we can recreate that in a way that's voluntary, that is secure,
and that it can also be used or licensed in ways for drug discovery and other medical innovations. I think that's probably the area that I'm most excited about for near-term AI progress, and it's one where I worry that a lot of regulation in the area could, if not stop it, at least push it off into the private sector in the same way that like your Fitbit is in some ways a regulatory arbitrage around health privacy.
I would just add one quick thing. We are seeing incredible results in things like cancer research. When you run in the AI infrastructure that can actually process this data in minutes versus weeks and months, we're seeing incredible results in pharmaceutical development when you can actually process this volume of data with the right infrastructure. So the sharing of those results and the cross-collaboration across the world is super important. God forbid we ever see anything else like the pandemic again, but that is a super important leading indicator to try to get to the right GDPR data priority so we can share that learning around the world.
Yep. We'll take another question right here.
Hello, Madam Ambassador. Question for you. We've been talking about collaboration versus competition. How would you say that the working relationship with the US when it comes to technology has changed with this new administration, or rather new administration?
Well, I don't, thanks for the question. I don't see any problems because the company is actually not that commission, European Commission or some kind of the specific government actually makes a decision on technological exchange. It's mostly company to company. It's a business driven. That's what makes us different from some other elbowing competitors. We actually are business-driven cooperation, and I think this is where the technology happens. And we spoke a little bit about the export control. We don't put the export control of others. And I have to say, actually, this administration took down the AI diffusion rule, which was put by the previous administration, which actually put us all. So made us all surprised where suddenly there was a bit of the drive to say that, oh, those countries are good ones to cooperate and the other half of the EU are not so much reliable. So I think that actually shows as well the drive, the interest there. So, well, hopefully, we can be able to sign Pax Silica, which as well contributes to this cooperation in the upcoming couple of weeks.
You mean to say 2 tiers within a single market is not an overarching mechanism for competitiveness?
I was saying, because the question was about this administration, so I was saying that we haven't seen this kind of the approach with this administration, while the previous introduced a very, tried to introduce a different way.
Any other takers on the question while we go to another question right here in the front?
Yes, hi. Hi, my question is pertaining back to your topic about the energy. Regular search is 0.3 watts, AI one is 3 watts. Given the dynamic and area behind you in the map and the allusion that you made pertaining to the impact of price and elasticity to the market in terms of being able to absorb it, how are you guys looking at the government-private cooperation if the market gets flooded with a lot of efficient, cheap AI models to compete with the other ones? Is that a consideration or is not even part of the conversation? And if I need to explain myself, happy to go back.
Well, I mean, I can tell you from an infrastructure perspective, right? We're constantly innovating on the power requirements to power the infrastructure. I mean, we've invested $100 billion here in the U.S. alone in a project we launched earlier this year called Project Rainier, where we delivered 5 gigawatts of power to a data center in the Midwest. So we're constantly innovating on trying to drive the right carbon footprint. We're trying to drive the right cost and price performance in our own chips that we manufacture to try to maintain our own supply chain when we get constricted by the global ecosystem. So from a power perspective, from an innovation perspective, we're pushing on driving efficiency. But I'll defer to the Madam Ambassador on the power regulations in the EU, but it's really about for us to drive the right efficiency models into our infrastructure.
Well, I think that we it's very difficult to add. Look, I think that our view and look at not only an efficiency but as well on security is extremely important to make sure that we actually have we can protect our citizens and we can meet their expectations as the consumers of the AI to make sure that their data is protected and their data used in a way they want to, that they are the owners of their data. I think this is where the edge is, and not to say, you know, this model is good and this is bad, except if we kind of take into account that infrastructure is already clean from high-risk third parties.
I'll just add, I think an implicit part of your question was, will AI commoditize, will open models compete away, and thereby like maybe make some of this energy harder to amortize? And I tend to think not. I think that you know, open models have caught up, but the gap is actually expanding over time, and especially at the frontier. And one of the reasons for this is because, you know, once you've trained a chatbot that is basically as good at English language as any other, yes, it sort of saturates the kind of mundane use cases. But, you know, Anthropic just purchased a life science company for $200 million or something like that, partly because they were trying to get access to this very unique kinds of data for drug discovery, for drug design, for controlling AIs in the context of a lab. And those kind of more bespoke use cases are going to drive greater capability in the frontier and in a way that's much harder for other smaller actors to replicate, because it's not just sitting around in a open source collection of web data.
I would not be doing my job if I didn't say that we are also having an event called the Global Energy Forum in 2 weeks' time on June 9th, next week at the Waldorf here in Washington, D.C., that is focused on bringing industry leaders together on that set of issues in particular. I think we have 1,500 leaders from around the world coming together to talk about a whole range of energy issues. But one of the main things that I expect we'll be talking about is infrastructure build out and energy demand on AI in particular. I want to come back to one of the core findings of the Commission report for our last question, and that's centered on trust. And so the Commission focused on 6 areas that we see as interconnected and hinge points to competing effectively in this moment on AI. And across those 6 areas, we had overarching findings. And the primary overarching finding is that trust is cumulative across all of those areas. So, Madam Ambassador, to the point on making sure that we're building in trust as a core component and talking to our publics about AI and what it means for them, we found that there is, in fact, a trust deficit. And if there's a perception on AI and energy that there isn't a huge amount of trust, or on AI and frontier models and innovation, there isn't a huge amount of trust, or AI and supply chains, there's not a huge amount of trust, then that is cumulative, and it has a really negative impact on our ability to work together as allies and partners and compete effectively. And so on this issue of trust for the allied tech stack, what is the most important thing to do right now in order to build trust to make sure that we're competing effectively together? And Rishi, we'll start with you and then come down this way.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. So we build trust through training of models, right? So everyone jumps knee-jerk reaction of, it's going to expose my data, it's going to do this, it's going to change how I operate. That's actually not the case in practice. We take great care in feeding to make sure our models are trained on the data that they're assigned to be trained on. And that's controlled by the end customer in whatever country you operate in. And then you layer that on top of things, the tools that are provided, like guardrails, to make sure we're not injecting hallucinations into the results of the data. So it's foundational for us to make sure we enable trust through making sure the models are trained on the right data. The control is in the hands of the customer. So one of the things we talk a lot about is being overly customer obsessed. And that's why we've created our platform to have optionality, whether it's Anthropic or OpenAI or a different model that you want to use, or you want to build your own. The infrastructure and tooling is there to do that, to make sure you can trust what you're deploying throughout the AI tech stack that's really going to drive innovative results for your citizens, for your end customers, whomever that may be, whether that's constituents or a warfighter, as an example?
I think of two things. One, there's this debate around how do we regulate frontier AI for the core sort of catastrophic risks like bio, cyber. And there, I think there's a government role, but I think as AI capabilities continue to ramp and accelerate, it's going to be hard for governments to keep up. And we do need some mechanism to keep these companies to their word. Right now, basically everything they do is voluntary. And so I've been a big fan of this notion of independent auditors and verification, where, think of the AI industry as something like, we're at the Industrial Revolution before we had GAAP accounting, before we had independent financial audits, and we need something like that for core safety claims of AI companies, and it has to be rooted in private, independent, third sector that can move at the pace of the technology. The second area where I see a big trust gap is in my realm of export controls. We saw earlier this year an executive at Supermicro be implicated in chip smuggling to China. This was a guy probably worth $500 million who was personally taking the labels off boxes. We've other reports of a company called Megaspeed, which is a shell company for smuggling chips from Singapore into China for Alibaba. We need some ways of actually, if we're going to export these chips widely, not just to tier 1 countries, but around the world to allies and partners who we may have trust on paper, we need to make that trust real in the form of some kind of hardware verification so we know where those chips are going, and if they end up in those countries, we can verify their final destination.
Well, I would say there are two things for me as well. First of all is transparency. I think that a lot of governments and a lot of citizens, be it in Europe but anyway around the world, actually expect transparency, that there will be someone who actually can check on one way or another, not necessarily go deep into algorithms, but would know how it functions, because it's too complicated for simple mind like a social scientist like me, for example, to understand. So I'm sure that there are other people like me in this room. So the transparency, how the models work, and if they indicate flaws, if they are so controversial, where, for example, as we spoke about biotech, where the trials actually are done by models, which is actually can be extremely sensitive question and can actually lead to some flaws. And another element, speaking about export control. I do understand that not everybody in this country and in this administration value very much international cooperation. But honestly, I worked with the export control for several years in my career. I spent a lot of time in dealing with export control and making sure that certain goods do not reach certain countries. And I can tell you, no one can deal that alone. You can have the best possible rules for export control. We can have our own rules. Someone else can have their own rules. Nothing of that will work if we actually don't work together. Certain countries may be allies, maybe partners, and and we have, again, I will fall back to the transparency, because you can be very much surprised. Not because certain machines or certain chemicals are sold to our competitors, but sometimes the decisions are taken, for example, for H200, and then you are surprised. I think that surprises in this area do not really help to build the trust.
I'll take moderator's prerogative and answer my own question. One of the main components of building trust is continuing to have conversations like this with diverse points of view, with diverse stakeholders from all around the world. The one follow-up that I would have for all of you is, what are some of the trust eroders, or what are some of the kind of catalysts that could really, really screw us up in building trust or building resilient supply chains? Are there any specific threats or behaviors or things that stick out as elements that would erode trust in a meaningful way?
I already said, and I see the and the secretary coming here, I would say surprises on both sides. Yeah. From our side, like when we come up with a wonderful regulation which is best of the kind, or actually, some decisions taken by US which actually surprises us. Like I mentioned the AI diffusion, like former AI diffusion rule or something else. I think that the less surprises, the more conversations this is where could help.
I'll just say that trust is built up over time, but can be eroded in an instant, as the old cliche goes. And I think, we want countries in our orbit to be rowing in the same direction, and that just doesn't mean on any one issue, but sort of towards a common vision of the future. And so, to me, I mentioned already, I'm a Canadian citizen. I think one of the areas where we've made a mistake is by trying to invite in, BYD cars through a trade deal, where we're using that as a kind of middle finger to the United States, saying, if you don't want to cooperate with us, we're going to go to your adversary. And I think those kind of actions, if taken by Canada or any other country, can set back things and poison the well quite deeply.
One last comment is something we do in every day. It's co-build, it's co-engineer, and co-create. And that for us is super important in our technology with our technology partners, but also obviously strategically important between ally nations. So as long as we continue to build that trust of co-engineering and co-creating, I think we'll build trust over time, or continue to earn trust with each other over time.
Great, thank you. Madam Ambassador, Sam, Rishi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Graham.
We're gonna take a quick reset of the chairs. We'll be joined up by Fred Kemp again to moderate a conversation with the lead ambassador on solving for some of these issues, specifically on supply chain and policies like Pax Silica, excuse me. So thank you so much, and we'll be back here in just a moment.
So this is a real treat, a great way to end this day's gathering here, which will then go to a reception outside, and we'll have Senators Young and Hickenlooper at 6:30 closing the entire day, which we're excited about, two of the honorary co-chairs of this commission report. And so I'm honored to be joined on stage by Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs, Jacob Hellberg. First of all, let me thank you for your public service on an issue that is so new. The diplomacy around it is so new, and it is also groundbreaking that we're really excited to have your voice here. As Graham suggested, impressive leader in shaping the country's AI policy, spearheading initiatives like Pax Silica, which was talked about quite a bit by previous panelists, focused on enhancing security and resilience of the global AI supply chain. Previously served as an advisor to Council of Economic Advisors at the White House, Commissioner U.S.-China Economic Security Review Commission, and senior advisor to the CEO of Palantir Technologies. I love it when you have that kind of knowledge come into government. He founded the Hill and Valley Forum, bipartisan coalition of Silicon Valley executives and lawmakers, and people know that very well here, that became a major force in bridging the knowledge gap between Silicon Valley and Capitol Hill, and I hope it is still working at bridging that knowledge gap because it's very, very necessary. So you also were here last fall in the reception area where we talked about the economics and geopolitics in the age of AI. A lot has moved in the last 6 months. Continuous frontier model rollouts, growing adoption of AI agents, changing global security landscape, breakthroughs like Mythos. Maybe we can start there, where you're one of the most interesting people talking about the global competition. And so if you're looking at the way we're going at this versus the way China is going at this, how's it going?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and it's great to see you, Fred. Thank you so much to the Atlanta Council for hosting this event. And since I know that we're wrapping up a day and it's a beautiful day outside, I'll do my best to make it part entertaining and also try to be concise. But
we also have a wonderful terrace, and so if you can stay for a beverage, please do that.
Well, our position in the administration from the very beginning has really been about, on the one hand, pursuing stability in our bilateral relationship with China, while at the same time unapologetically pursuing an agenda to make sure that America competes as voraciously as possible. We have done this by making sure that we've implemented a number of measures domestically, including through tax reform, through permitting reform, as well as through trade policy to reshore every part of the supply chain that can be reshored to the US. And we've also done this around the world by implementing different initiatives, including the AI Expert Program, including Paxilica, to make sure that America remains the operating system and the platform for the 21st century. So we're very, very excited about all the different initiatives that the administration is doing. Obviously, we're not even yet halfway through this administration, so there's still a lot of work to do, but we think that we've really built the rails for potentially a generational change in our alliance structures.
So pick up on this a little bit. Again, maybe just drilling down on the China-US contest a little bit more. China is going at this differently. How would you describe the differences and where and how would you describe the stakes? I talked earlier today comparing, not being nearly the expert you are, but comparing what we're going through to the second industrial revolution in the sense that we're at the beginning. I don't know whether 1% in, 2% in, whatever percent in, maybe you can help us with that. But what happened over that time was a lot of good. People moved from agriculture to industry. There was a lot of growth. There was a lot of wealth that got spread. There was the growth of capitalism, but also the growth of communism. And there were also mechanized warfare in World War I and World War II. So take a look at the China-US contest in that respect, and what kind of era are we going into and how are we doing in the contest?
Yeah, and I think the first industrial revolution is such an apt comparison because it was another moment in human history when societies were undertaking really, really deep economic change. And we saw in the industrialized world economic growth during agrarian societies hovered between 0 and 1%. And along came the Industrial Revolution, and all of a sudden, economic growth in a secular way picked up between 1% and 3%, which was really started a step change in people's standard of living. The difference between growing at 1% and 2 to 3% is the difference between compounding growth. It's a graph that basically expands our standard of living exponentially, and every percentage point we add on top of 3% creates a leap change in our national wealth. And what's at stake with AI is potentially us being on the cusp of another secular shift and acceleration in our economic growth as a country, which could really mean, if you extrapolate this 10, 15 years out into the future, it could really paint a picture for a transformed world where the AI-led economies are the new club of wealthy countries, and the countries who have lagged behind in adopting AI technology, will essentially see a gap in their national wealth grow bigger and bigger. I want to dial back to the first part of your question, which is, how is our approach distinct from China's approach? And it's such an important question because there are three big conditions to winning the AI race. On the one hand, we need to have the world's best qualitative technology. We need the world's most advanced innovation. On the other hand, we need to have the world's most market share, which is really an effort spearheaded through the AI Export Program. And third, we need to secure our supply chains, because all of this is moot if we can't actually have access to chips, to actuators, to all the different components that we need in order to continue racing. And so on the third part, that's really where Pax Silica is so important. How are we going to secure our supply chains? We know what China's strategy is. China's supply chain security strategy is the Belt and Road Initiative. It is to acquire strategic assets, strategic choke points. They have gone about the Belt and Road Initiative by pursuing a government-run, centralized, in-house strategy where it's state-owned enterprises, government-run banks, funding government-run roads, government-built bridges, all government-run, centrally planned in-house. We are not going to compete with that as a country because that's just not what America is good at. Our government and our system is not set up in a way to build very large infrastructure projects entirely in-house around the world. What we do have that is quite distinct and unique from China is we have private companies who build really, really great products that billions of users around the world really like. And so part of what we're pursuing at the State Department, which is fairly new and novel, is actually trying to lean into that comparative advantage as a strength by having what I call a product-centric approach to foreign policy. What does that mean in practice? That means partnering very closely with the private sector to develop commercially viable services and platforms that will allow achieving strategic outcomes. So one example that we rolled out just a few weeks ago was this economic security zone that we're working on with the Philippines, and for which we're in talks with a number of different private companies to actually do a build out in the Philippines. The product for the economic security zone is predictability and certainty. We are delivering the industrial comparative advantages that the Philippines offers for industry segments of the supply chains where the margins are too low to actually do on US soil, while at the same time creating the kind of policy predictability and certainty that private companies need to deploy capital in these places. Policy uncertainty is a huge bottleneck to private investment, and our goal is for the economic security zone to help address that. So that's just one of several examples of how we're partnering with the private sector to make sure that we can actually deliver solutions that ultimately the private sector will own, will improve over time, and will operate for the long term, and that will ultimately produce a strategic outcome for our country.
Fascinating answer. Let me go to the key topic of the previous panel. The administration's international AI strategy centers on, as you talked about, this export plan, the promotion export of the American AI stack worldwide. Yet one of the findings of our commission report is how an allied AI stack can multiply the U.S. strategic advantage. How do you navigate that tension between the goal of maintaining the prominence or even dominance of an American AI stack and allies' concerns for their own national interest, as you know, the whole idea of AI sovereignty.
Yeah, and also such an excellent point. And the answer is very simple, which is that the stack is growing and highly dynamic. And if you look back, if you went back 20 years and looked at PC computers or Macintosh computers, what did the stack look like then? And just think about the multitude of new platforms, new services. Back then we were in the early days of Microsoft Windows, and you basically had a small number of very, very pixelated applications that existed. And today, you not only had the explosion of the World Wide Web, but there was a smartphone revolution, the App Store revolution, and so many different kinds of new technologies that have become platforms for other new technologies to be built on top of. And so when we think about the stack, it's a pie that's growing very, very quickly. And our message to allies, obviously countries are free to do what they want. They can compete, in whatever segments they want. But historically, the best way to compete in technology is to not compete for the last platform that was already invented. It's to actually compete for the next one that hasn't been invented yet. Otherwise, they will sink billions of dollars in resources in recreating something that already exists and works perfectly fine just for nationalistic purposes. The odds are is that it'll probably be an inferior product, and those are resources that are not going to go towards building the next big thing that's around the corner. So our message to a lot of allies is the pie is growing. Think of the future. New things are built all the time, and compete for the next thing, not yesterday's technology.
So what's your message then to Europeans? I've just come back from Brussels, and as you know, there's all sorts of talk about sovereignty of the cloud, AI sovereignty. What's your message to European allies? It's pretty clear that they don't have the leaders in the artificial intelligence field right now, or at least not at the level that the US has. And that if they want to go in too sovereign of a European direction, one can debate what that word means, they're going to be slower. But they argue, well, maybe we have to develop our own system. The US might just decide to remove something that we've got from a US company. Can we really trust that? What's your message to them about how best to combine with the United States in this era you just talked about going forward?
The best message is to empower their builders. Ultimately, great companies are not built by committees and commissions and, frankly, bureaucracies. They're built by very talented entrepreneurs and builders, and who have the ability to actually assemble teams, have access to things like power. It doesn't hurt if they're operating in a lower tax environment, and are actually able to iterate really, really quickly. Obviously, being in a risk-embracing culture is very, very helpful too. But Europe is home to a lot of really great talent. And so, my message to them is they have all of the ingredients needed to succeed. The best thing that they should do is empower their talent pool in order to try competing for the next wave, the AI app revolution, and all of the different innovations that we're not even conceiving of today. Rather than trying to, regulate their way into reverse engineering some sort of domestic European AI champion. I don't think historically that's worked. I don't think it has a great track record. If the goal is European prosperity, and I think that is all of our goal because we want a strong Europe, then empowering European builders is the best thing to do, and making sure that European builders find opportunities in Europe is central to that.
Yeah, great message. Our Europe Center is really pushing the innovation charge for Europe, so that makes a lot of sense to us. One of the points that I found really interesting in the commission report, and didn't expect it when we started this commission 8 months ago, was the concern about American public misgivings over artificial intelligence, and the impact it could have actually in implementation and competing. My own home state of Utah, there's protests of a sort I wouldn't have expected necessarily about the new data center in the northwest of the state, where Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, is pointing the finger as well at China and fomenting some of this protest and resistance and distrust. Long question, but let me shorten it down to this. How important is this issue of American trust in the technology? And of course, China doesn't have this problem that they're dealing with. And how do you see what are its sources and what's its significance?
Yeah, so I think it's a little early to tell, how much of this is organic and grassroots versus linked to, the fanning of foreign powers. I will say that it is obviously a phenomenon that we're seeing in our country, but we're also seeing it in Europe. We're seeing it, in Australia. We're seeing the elements of, what some might call a techlash in a number of different places. And, the interesting thing about the current permutation that we're seeing, you brought up the Industrial Revolution earlier and how, that gave birth to the rise of communism. And, I think it's really, really worrisome. And, during the first Industrial Revolution, it was obviously, communism was synonymous with Marx. I think if you look at, if you strip down all the vocabulary like safety and sustainability and all these nice words, a lot of the ideology behind the intellectual movement that aims at banning data centers and imposing arguably confiscatory taxes really boils down to a relatively Marxist idea, which is the idea that an enlightened priesthood is necessary in order to basically protect people from, an impending apocalyptic future, and that the spontaneous organization of free people producing things is inherently suspect. And I think, where that leads is a government by permission rather than people being free to build things. And it's really, really worrisome. Ultimately, I think the contrary to that is obviously the capitalist school of thought, that is that free people and capitalism actually works. I think arguably, if you look at the AI sliver of that debate, a lot of that debate has been focused on mass jobs dislocation, and a lot of the critique leveled against AI is this idea that AI will lead to a massive dislocation of the employment market. And the reality is, today, there just simply has not been any kind of mass dislocation. And in fact, unemployment is at 4.3% last I checked, which the IMF standard for full employment is 5%, and we're actually below that. And so I think if you dispassionately look at the data with a cool-headed way, AI is not leading to the mass job dislocation. And I'll actually go even farther and say that there's a non-zero chance AI leads to increased demand for work. And the argument around the theory of Jevons paradox, which is that efficiency drives demand, and when a resource becomes more efficient, demand and consumption for that resource goes up. So if you think of computers used to be super expensive. They used to, very large. They used to take up a whole room. It used to be that only large corporations could afford buying computers. And the size and cost of computers went down. And the result was we just now buy a lot more computers to do a lot more stuff. And so if you believe that AI is going to lead to increases in productivity, humans are going to be able to do a lot more things. And so fundamentally, that could end up leading to a scenario where there's actually a demand for labor because there's an explosion in different services. So that's my 2 cents on that.
That's fascinating answer. We want to be, and I think for all of us, just to recognize that we're at the beginning of an era, and this is hopefully a positive way to lead it. Last question. I want to be respectful of your time. Someone's going to have to put in place international governance and standards. This is also your role as a diplomat. How should the U.S. be showing up or leading in international governance and standards? And then how do you compete in setting those standards, say, vis-a-vis China?
Yeah, so I think, our approach to, so I would maybe break down a little bit, this, the administration is highly skeptical of supranational bodies in the business of governance because our administration is very much of the view that our government was elected directly by the people, and so as a country, we should want to be able to retain the right to make sovereign decisions outside of unelected, unaccountable supranational organizations. I do think that there is a conversation surrounding the benefits, the potential benefits of coordinating with other countries on addressing cybersecurity threats, threats around physical infrastructure, risks around deepfakes. So coordinating with other partners on the identification of real-world harms that are worthy of coordination, I think is something that is a conversation that's very much taking place. But as an administration, we haven't yet adjudicated on what the final road ahead lies on that front.
Under Secretary Helberg, Jacob, thank you so much for taking this time. Thank you all for being here, and join us for the reception outside.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just a couple of quick notes on the reception. So before we go, I'm Dr. Raul Brenz. I'm the director of the GeoTech Center here at the Atlantic Council. And I promise I will keep it brief because there's no worse enemy than me right now between you and the reception. First of all, I want to thank everyone in the room and online. We are going to take a brief break until 6:30, and at 6:30, Senators Young and Senators Hickenlooper are going to be joining us. We're going to be coming back into the forum for a fireside chat with the senators. A couple of quick call-outs. I want to thank my team, the GeoTech Center, Sokoli Felt, Trisha Ray, Ryan Pan, and Emily Sespico, who have been a lot of the support throughout the entire secretariat of the commission, as well as the authors of this report. And lastly, please go and enjoy the reception, and I'll see you at 6:30 when I'm ushering you back in.